trustees and fellow executive staff. Thank you very much for being here. I would like to go ahead and call the meeting to order, and would one of our fellow board members like to lead us on pledge of allegiance? Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We're gonna move forward to 1.3, approval of board agenda items. Fellow board members, I hope we all reviewed the agenda. Is any changes, any adjustments that you would like to see? I would
Get a
entertain
motion
them.
to approve the agenda?
Sure. All
Second.
those, okay, second, can we vote?
Ms. Lopez?
Aye.
Ms. Turner?
Aye.
Ms. Ariano?
Aye.
Mr. Sandoval?
Aye.
Mr. Padel?
Aye, Captain.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. Having said that, we do have a closed session item, 2.1. Do we have any public comments? We do not. Okay. With that, I would like to entertain a motion to close this meeting and go into closed session.
A motion to adjourn a closed session.
Can I get a second, please?
I second.
All right. Vote.
Ms. Lopez?
Aye.
Ms. Turner?
Aye.
Ms. Ariano?
Aye.
Mr. Sandoval? Mr. Patel?
Aye, Captain.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, we will reconvene in open session ASAP.
Oh, thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're back to open session. Actions taken during closed session. During the closed session, the board has appointed Madonna Katis as Katis. I love that. Madonna Katis as coordinator of extended learning. The vote was 5-0. All right, thank you very much. Congratulations, Madonna Katis. All right, having said that, we're going to keep moving forward. Do we have any public comments?
No, there are no public comments.
Okay, any on non-agenda items? How about public comments on agenda items? All right, so we're gonna move forward with our main agenda for today, 6.1, information, presentation of student data and school budgets.
All right, so it's going to be some teamwork here. And we've got, as we get started, I know you've got quite a number of handouts, and I think we saved the big budget handouts for later because a lot of paper. All right, so you have with you just a printed copy of our PowerPoint. Along with that, you have a very large worksheet to give you some space. Just to draw your eye as we go through these, we're using the same essential questions that we're using with our other educational partners, so that as we build our next LCAP, for instance, things that we put in that need to be measurable and have the data points with it. And so to measure success and continuation of those in the coming years. So using these same essential questions when we review data throughout the district, so that we're keeping the message consistent and we're getting the feedback from each of our partners. So it's not on. All right. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about our student data. So we'll go over the state dashboard data. And remember that dashboard data is gathered basically from spring, the prior school year. So it would be spring 2023 data. We'll go through some of our climate and engagement pieces, and actually you'll see some of our thought exchange pieces embedded throughout. We grabbed some of those highest ranking comments as they associated with our different areas, and then Summer will delve a little bit deeper into our very first thought exchange as part of hers. And then Rosa has some school budget information about how school budgets are allocated, prior years, current year, as well as where schools were sitting a couple weeks ago at their mid-year budget check-ins. So for our California school dashboard data, wanted just to draw your eye that we're back to our more traditional display of the colors, red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. Remember last year they were all in purple in a different kind of bar graph than we were used to seeing. And so within that is our ELA, math, English learner progress, chronic absenteeism, and suspension rates. So our essential questions, and we put them up here at the beginning and then at the end. And so we'll take a pause to make sure that you have a chance to jot down anything as we go to help guide our discussion. So this is what we're doing. We went through this with our administrators when we looked at their dashboard data, and in our LCAP formation group meetings that we've had, we're using these same questions. So what are you seeing? What is the data telling you? How would you describe present levels? What do you notice about subgroup performance? What inferences can we draw from these data sets, and what learning needs seem evident? So one of our thought exchange overarching for our academic focus is that the responses indicate a variety of aspects related to academic focus, include the need for more effective teaching methods, importance of inclusivity for students of different nationalities, needs for hands-on science programs, importance of English language proficiency, a call for more mental health support for students, smaller class sizes, more rigorous academic standards, And overall, the responses highlighted the need for better communication between school and parents, importance of discipline and safety on campus, and overall participants seemed to perceive the academic focus as needing improvement in several areas, including teaching methods, inclusivity, and communication. So as we delve into that, I'm going to hand this to Becky. She's going to take us through our language arts dashboard data
Really quick, those responses were
from our thought exchange. So we took those top level comments, and anyone who looks at our thought exchange sees all of the information. That's the beauty of thought exchange. There's no need to pull and disseminate. It's all right there.
So what that is a summary. So it takes all of the comments that were made and it finds all, it codes it basically. It codes all the common languages within it and then ranks those, what things were said, and then forms through AI, forms a statement that encompasses what was said across all. You'll see in one part, the 2000 something rankings and statements.
thank you.
Wow, so, AI.
I was just
We
gonna say.
use AI to.
Thought exchange uses.
Yeah.
We don't,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
That's
the
great.
idea. The idea was, it took the input of data.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Responses and correlated that to a certain extent and then created sentences. or paragraphs.
That's
Yeah.
So
So
cool.
it took what took us a year in our dissertation programs to code all the statements that people did. It took us a year to highlight and code it. It did it probably in seconds, right? It takes thousands and thousands of comments and just looks for all of the commonalities. Yeah,
No,
but then it's,
this is just a great example of how in education, there's a lot of fear. with
Yeah.
AI, and there should be.
Mhm.
But the truth is, it's gonna be a partnership. You know, it's not that we're gonna ban AI, it's that we're gonna have to find ways of incorporating it in a way that's beneficial without creating.
It makes it easier for the person who's,
pieces of integrity. So I think it's good. First time?
yeah,
First time?
This is our first thought exchange, yeah.
I was just gonna say, yeah.
these things for quite a while, and yeah, they've
I mean, they were using it in beta testing. or something.
Yeah, I learned a lot. It's like learning from other people's challenges, right? So.
Sorry, PK, didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's really nice to make that.
See. Okay, so again, looking at our thought exchange around the theme of reading. These are three of the comments that were made by people who engaged in this process. The highest ranking, and you can see then by the stars, the ranking, how many people voted on those comments. So a focus on reading, writing, and math, including more time reading or being able to get more books from the library to take home, and focus more on basic reading and phonological reading skills. We have enough time to look at that. I don't want to rush anyone. Okay. So this is our overall district-wide reading results. As Melissa said, we're back to those 5 colors to rank us. And you can see that as a district overall, we declined by 3.2 points. So we're in the orange as a district, but I want to draw your attention down to the equity report beneath the dashboard radar there, meter, where you see that there's one student group that's in the red. And when we look at the student group that's in the red, we can see that that's English learners. And so as we're developing our new LCAP, we will be required to address that. When one of our 3 unduplicated groups of students are in the red, we will be required to focus with a very specific goal for those students. 5 student groups. And so when you look at the next middle top box, so it's Hispanic, our homeless students, socioeconomically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and white students. Mhm.
These ones right here, we don't have a significant enough population.
But right above that, nobody scored in the yellow as a group, as a subgroup. No subgroups, yeah. What else did I want to make sure to point out? Oh, just because we're going to be talking a lot about LCAP development because we're at that 3-year end of our current LCAP and beginning a brand new one with a new template, new expectations. I just want you to keep in mind those 3 subgroups. And so those are our English learners, our homeless and foster students, and our socioeconomically disadvantaged students. So just as we're going through everything, please continue to reflect on those groups. So by school site, New Republic overall scored in the orange, and they were considered to have maintained their status, meaning they didn't significantly increase or decrease their scores. And you can see that for them, they do not have any subgroups that are in the red. La Jolla does have English learners in the red. Overall, they maintained. However, there is concern for that subgroup of students that we'll be focusing on. And in addition to the district creating goals and actions around that, each school will also be required to include goals for those students within their single plans for student achievement. Yeah. Oh, and the LCAP, yeah.
Do they have the redesignated children in that group?
No, these are all students before they are redesignated. Mhm. Okay, so Santa Rita Elementary declined fairly significantly and has 4 subgroups in the red. The ones that we'll be focusing on for goals in particular will be English learners, homeless, and socioeconomically disadvantaged, although we want obviously to increase learning for all of our students. McKinnon increased by 12 points and have 0 subgroups in the red, and overall they are in the yellow. Looking at our middle schools, Gavilan View declined by 7 points. And again, in the red, we can see we have our English learners and our homeless students. And JGMS maintained, but do have English learners and students with disabilities in the red. So I'd like to give you a few minutes or at least a few seconds to kind of jot down some notes on your note-taking page, reflecting on what we just reviewed for our English language arts.
Krisha, real quick, can you point out for the public where we have our documents posted?
Yes,
In
for the-
case anybody's following along on that.
Yes, for anyone following along with us on YouTube, if you go to santaritasschools.org, you will see a header that indicates where the board documents can be found on our website.
This
Yeah,
is
so
from
the SBAC.
SBAC testing last spring, so last school year. It's not this school year at all. We'll be looking at that when we look at our iReady data to see where we're progressing. Yeah. There is definitely a theme that we need to focus on our English learners and do something significantly different to help them achieve.
I'm not sure if we have the data as far as like, for example, our Hispanic subgroup, what percentage is English learners and which percentage is not?
I don't have that. It's something that
know.
we could look at. Yeah.
Because I know they consider that a subgroup within itself, but I mean,
Right.
it's great to see of that
Which ones
subgroup.
cross over?
Yeah, because yeah.
You'll also see that when we look at the English language learner data, you'll see there kind of what percentage of our students are English language learners, which then we know that the last time I looked, 89% of our student population were identified as Hispanic. That fluctuates. So, but 89% of our students identified as Spanish. And when we look at our English language learners, you'll see what percentage are English language learners. And then we can just subtract, and that would tell us what percentage are not, what percentage of our students are Hispanic, but not English language learners.
And I'm just thinking because the type of resources each of them might need is different, even though they're all part of the same subgroup as Hispanics.
And also just keep in mind that not all our English language learners are Hispanic, right? So we have students who speak Punjabi who are English language learners. We have students who speak Arabic who are English language learners. So our English language learners encompass all students whose primary language is other than English
Thank you
as
for
well. So
clarifying
yeah.
that. Okay.
Okay, are we ready to move on to math? So again, this is from our thought exchange, and these are the top two tiered highest ranked from there. So in regard to the math support, that would, as you see that as an indicator, needs for more support to maybe separate into support classes, and also for math and then reading intervention, as Becky referred to in the last. Give you a moment with that.
And I know that data might not, this is right, but it says we don't have enough math supports. That's not really telling us at what grade levels, like if it's elementary or middle school. And just across the board, it's just statements.
Because these are comments that are made by the public.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it doesn't tell us that. It just says
Too, right? It's only 12 is what it says.
12 people, right? So that's there. So when it looks at the thousands and thousands of comments, it then breaks it down into math. So these were the two highest ranking math. So yeah, so on that one where more interventions are needed, 34 people rated that one, but we don't know, yeah, based on that comment where it's from.
So
Yep.
someone filling out the survey typed in that comment, and then it allows other people to then just rank it later.
Got it.
So you would assume that that 34 who are ranking it would encompass a variety of roles. They could be teachers, they could be parents, they could be different grade levels. So that's why everybody, again, the benefit of thought exchange is unlike a traditional survey where you submit it and nobody else sees what you've submitted, right? Until we present it to you. In the thought exchange, everybody's seeing everything. And then what they get to say is, ooh, I really agree with your comment. I'm going to give it 5 stars.
That's a really good idea.
Or I don't agree with your comment. I'm going to give it 1, and I'm going to comment a comment for or against that, right? So I could say, I could submit another thought that says, at my school site, we have ample math interventions or whatever that is. So then you can comment and then folks can start to rate that. So it starts to see what everybody's actually thinking. Because one of the challenges is that oftentimes there's a perception that everybody's thinking what I'm thinking, right? Because and what this does is puts out there, what are all of those thoughts together? So.
Thank you. That's a good clarification.
Sorry, thank you. Overall, with math as a district, you can see that we've maintained within our subgroups. We have the English learners, Hispanic and socioeconomic disadvantaged in the red, and for orange, homeless students with disabilities, and white. As Becky explained earlier, within these subgroups, under the new LCAP, we will be serving unduplicated students, not only as a district goal, but with site goals as well. Okay. And onto the sites, you see that New Republic maintained with students with disabilities in the red. La Jolla also maintained with some students in the orange, but we're doing well with the maintaining. And for Santa Rita Elementary, we have in the red with our English learners, Hispanic, homeless, and socioeconomic, and as was explained earlier, we'll be focusing on those main groups for EL and homeless and socioeconomic disadvantaged. McKinnon maintained in the red with students with disabilities. For our middle schools, Gavilan with English learners, Hispanic and socioeconomic disadvantage for focus. And JG also maintained with English learners and students with disabilities in the focus. Thanks. Okay, essential questions.
So I think we're moving into our EL data next. Melanie has been participating with our two schools that qualify for the assistance with the County Office of Ed for the professional learning networks. And their focus has been on EL. So she's going to walk us through our EL data from the dashboard.
Perfect. So yes, just like Melissa shared, I've been working on the differentiated assistance. Santa Rita and Gavilan View have been the two sites that we're focusing on. And we meet with MCOE monthly. And so we're looking at that ongoing data, getting together, trying new things in the classroom, and then coming back with that progress monitored data. So it's been a really cool experience to be involved in that process. I've also loved just the connection between Santa Rita and Gavilan View, right? They're really looking at the data between that 5th and 6th grade. So on that first slide, here's our key thoughts. I actually don't have it in my PowerPoint, but there it is. So we need to improve in academic results for English learners. This is the EL progress district-wide. Oh, it's on the backside. There we go.
Before, can you
Uh-huh.
English learner progress? What is that?
It's looking at our English language learners and their academic progress. So both in math and English language arts.
It's measured, this is measured by the.
Yeah, and we're utilizing the LPAC as the data tool.
As far as like where they started, kind of where they're at now, how much progress is.
Moving from a 1. So
Yeah.
looking at it, at that progress from a non-English speaker, a 1, moving towards a fluently proficient English language speaker at a 4 or a reclassification. So like our kids moving through that process.
So for example, let's say we have 100 students within that category and
Mhm.
50 of them are at 2s, let's say, out of 10, let's say. I'm not sure what the
Mm-hmm.
number is. And so this kind of measures, okay, those 50 have moved to a 4 or a 5.
That would
And
be.
so that's
Like, are they making progress,
Yeah, that's
right?
the-
Are they, yeah, they're not going
the
backwards.
percentage of those students that actually are moving forward, right? So, or they moved one, sorry, okay. they moved
Or at
forward.
least moved. It could even be moving within that range in reality as they're looking at it, right? Like, are they making progress?
Okay, so
And that's what this data says. So the 41.7 of our students are making progress utilizing that tool. Does that clarify your question?
no, it does.
Perfect. So the district-wide, we're making 41.7 progress.
And sorry, just to clarify, so it's gonna be not the same, you actually get a numerical score. So say you take the test at the end of 2nd grade, and I'm gonna make up a number for you that you're like 185.
Right.
Then you take the test at the end of 3rd grade, which is a much more difficult test because it's now like at the end of 3rd grade level. If you got like a 201 on the 3rd grade test, like they would consider that making progress because you got 185 as a
Okay, that's
2nd
a better way of
grader.
describing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Perfect. So then looking at New Republic Elementary School, 49.2% of students, EL students, are making progress. So they're in that green section.
Can you go back real quick just to, because I think that answers Jacob's other question you had, to that first one, the district one. Explaining the current English language learners recently, or Sarah, when you were asking about that group. Just that
That
reminder,
first tab.
this
right here.
right here, yeah.
Actually, it's-
Oh,
So
does it
those
doesn't
are
work on the
those
screen.
different classifications, kind of like you were saying. So that's those current English language learners who are currently right now designated. The recently reclassified within, is it 4 years now? Yeah,
Mhm.
4 years.
4
It used to
years.
be 3, 4 years. And then students who are English only. So it's looking at how are each of those groups progressing.
And then I just have a question. So usually when students start at our district, let's say, they're going to go into TK kinder, what classifies them as English learners is if they speak another language besides.
Yeah.
And when
English,
we do
correct?
just like Summer mentioned, the home survey. So if parents come in and they fill out that survey that their student speaks another language in the home,
So
that
automatically
designates
that
them
makes
an EL.
that- and then
No,
from-
it doesn't
it doesn't?
automatically
Okay.
make them an EL. It makes them eligible to take the initial LPAC, which is given in-house. And based on the score that the student receives on that assessment, they're designated an
Okay.
English learner, or they might be designated, what do we call it? an IFEP. Everything has an acronym, right? Which is the initially fluent English proficiency. Thank you. And so when a student registers with us, every student, the parents fill out the home language survey, and the questions are regarding their native language spoken at home. And there's 4 questions, and those are federally designated questions. And if the answer on the first 3 questions is a language other than English, it triggers the eligibility to be administered the initial LPAC, And at the start of the school year for newly registered students, we have a timeline in which to administer that. So like a lot of times that's our incoming TK or kinder, somebody who's new to us. And then as students come in throughout the year, that's individually administered as someone registers and we receive that information. Now, if they were already designated an English learner in a prior district and we receive that information, then they're automatically in our program.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point for parents in my parent role. And I work with parents a lot around this, is that if you went to Alisal and you were designated as an English language learner in kindergarten, and you come here to Santa Rita and you were not redesignated in that district, so you did not initially get our redesignated. When you come to this district, no matter what you put on that home language survey, you are an English language learner still. So sometimes what parents will do is they'll come to another district, complete the home language survey, putting only English, partially so that students don't take the assessment or some period. But because CalPADS registers that as the student was an English language learner, it's not until the redesignation that they're not an English language learner. So you can't opt out of that process. So sometimes parents will say, can I opt out? I don't want my student to be an English language learner. Once that designation is there, they can appeal to the state. There's a whole thing, but you are an English language learner, regardless of what you put on the home language survey within another district.
And the reverse thing happens all the time too, where people are absolutely English language learners and the family can't communicate with you at all, and they just put English on the form, and that's all that they can put, that's all they are willing to put, and you have to take that. You can't then say like, we're gonna go test your child anyway. So we have hidden like English language learners because of
Unidentified.
what people put on the form. Before we move from the slide, I want to point something out, and it's a trend that research has also acknowledged, is that our recently reclassified English learners typically score much higher even than English only speakers. And so you can see, even though they're below standard of these three subgroups,
This doesn't work, so.
they're still
work
scoring
on the
the
screen.
closest to standard.
Here.
Yeah, I was kind of confused about, I was gonna ask, how are those, but they were the same standards, but so they are the same. standards.
Oh, yeah, and my opinion would be they're scoring higher because it takes a lot to be redesignated. It's hard. So they had to achieve their English status versus the other group was just given it. So they're probably doing better in the classroom too.
So these reclassified English learners, when they come in, we say they're in this English learner, then we retest them. They're now reclassified as current English learners. That could be a process for our students as well. They get basically out of this English learning once they do that.
So yeah, so there's a couple of ways that they're going to get to that
Redesignated.
reclassification or redesignated. It could be initial, like Melissa shared. So they're initially redesignated. So they have one of those areas marked as another language. We give them the initial test. Let's say they're in kindergarten. They're initially redesignated, saying no, they meet all the qualifications. Or they're designated as English language learner some point along the way. They take that LPAC each year along with their state assessment, and they meet the criteria for reclassification. So they could be designated as an English language learner for 1 year, 5 years, 9 years, 12 years. It just kind of depends. Once they meet the criteria, then they move into that reclassification. So for each student, it's dependent on that path for them.
No, I'm gonna look at it a little bit different. I think what this shows to a certain extent is proof positive that if we have the sufficient support, given the fact that they were English learners and they're outperforming English only learners, that to me provides proof that given the right circumstances of need, of motivation, I need to learn English, I'm motivated to learn English, and I have the support systems, the additional learning, that not only can you bring them back to the level, you're gonna exceed students who don't have those supports, you know? And so I know when you said earlier, that was an interesting fact right there. You know, that's what I'm doing. Is that there is a way.
They can do it.
They can do it, you know, and if these students can do it with the proper support and motivation, then that gives us proof that whatever, you know, we try to improve or put in, that there is a possibility of that translating to other groups.
And we've been talking about exploring dual language immersion at some point, and that's the same thing with the dual language immersion data shows that children who've been in that process, regardless of what language they started with, when they get to the high school level, they're outscoring everybody else because they've had all of this vocabulary development, all of this expansion of the ideas of language.
High school teachers.
Excuse me.
Completely can concur with that. And look at my students and then look at their reading levels. Surprisingly, exactly what you're showing is those students who were English learners early on, they have the proper support, they're outperforming my English only students, you know? And so it's obviously working by the time you get to me. You know, and so once again, we have additional support. That I just know this can.
And I think what's important about, you said this is more my migrant hat back on, but is that what we also know is what this tells me, and what like I used to work with my migrant team on frequently, is what we're doing for English language learners, all our kids need, right? So all of our students need what we're doing. So it's not as if we give our kids, our students who are designated English only, what we're giving to our designated English language learners, it's going to harm them. In fact, we know that what this data says to me is students who receive that outperform our English only students, which says to me our English only students need that too, right?
And can
And
benefit.
so, and yeah, and so in migrant, that was one of those areas for us. And it goes back to what Sarah shared, and that oftentimes our families will mark only English because the feeling is if there's another language on there, it's going to put them on a track, because that's how it used to be. You were Spanish speaker, you were on this track. And so our families put English only, thinking that it's going to increase opportunity. And I used to always work with our families and say, actually, like, this gives them more opportunity. They're going to get what our English only students need as well. And so for our families out there, this isn't a deficit, right? What this data shows us is if your child is labeled as an English language learner or has that designation, it's actually more likely that they're going to outperform students who don't.
I think another aspect is, I think parents understanding what it means to English.
For sure.
I'm sure has changed over.
It
That was
has,
the high
it
school.
has, yeah.
So even my
for sure.
perception of it's probably very different. So I mean, that might be something to look at in the future.
Yeah.
When we're filling out the forms,
Yeah.
is some type of
Education or
Yeah.
front loading.
Because I think there is some misinformation as far as what an English language learner is.
We've been doing a lot of that, Blanca and I, especially just coming from migrant, but I laugh because I put Spanish on my personal children's on purpose. Like I was like, and then they redesignated off the bat. I was like, don't do so good on that test. Like give yourself that support, right? But they redesignated right off the bat. And it wasn't a lie. We spoke Spanish to them at home. But again, like for me, it was that I want them to have that. I want them to have that opportunity. And so, yeah, we've been doing a lot of work around educating families around what it means to be an English language learner and the benefit of that, and how we support with becoming multi-language learners, right? And changing that from becoming fluent in English to being, fluent in multiple languages.
And that's the reason why I brought this question. Sorry, guys, but that's the reason, because when I, like Jacob said, we came to this school, and perception is a whole different thing. And so when my little one started and they told me, I was like, wait, yeah, she gets spoken by, grandparents or whatever, but it's mostly, and I was like, wait, what's that? However, she grew up, she came, she, got out of it, she reclassified. And I thought it was important for us to know that it is a process. And I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I'm thinking that mostly our incoming students are classified as that, but then we see that growth. That's why I wanted to point that out, because right now, if we look at the overall, it's kind of like, wait, but there's that growth. That's
Totally. Thank you for sharing that. All right, well, let's keep moving, team. So we already looked at New Republic Elementary. It's that 49.2 are making progress. They're in the green. We have La Jolla Elementary School also in the green. They're at 48.5, so they're making progress. They've increased by 2.8%. We have Santa Rita Elementary School. They're in the red. They're 29.2% are making progress, and they've actually declined by 22.6%. McKinnon Elementary, excuse me, they're at 51.5, so making progress, and they've increased by 2.7%. And they're in that green. John Gutierrez Middle School is at 30.8, are making progress. They've declined by 18.1%. And Gavilan View Middle School, in the orange section, they're at 47.1% making progress, and they've declined by 5.7%. Okay, and this is our opportunity to jot down essential questions or trends that you're seeing. So we'll give a minute or so for that.
So, as you finish that up, and if you need to grab a snack or take a break, we're gonna move into our local data. So this will have some, like comparative from last year to this year in that piece, but and current year. So this is where our students are with our iReady. And Becky's going to lead us through this. She's been working a lot with our school sites this year and our academic coaches and principals around getting in and looking at the iReady, getting the PD in for folks at the school site, as well as the data chats that we've had around it. But we'll also be looking at some EL specific data as a subgroup with our iReady scores.
While we wait for Sarah, can we go back a slide or two? Yeah. Actually, we can use one before that. Let's see. Okay, now. So on the chart where it has a different color coding, and for example, this one is in the green, and it says 51.5%. What changes? What color is it? Are they looking at percentage that are making progress, or are they looking at as far as how many, if it's increased from the year?
Making progress,
Okay.
which means increasing.
Okay. So I know, for example, this one's green, which green is better. It's blue would be excellent, but green is good. But I mean, relatively speaking, 51% also means that 49% is not making progress, right? So that means that if you're having half of your students make progress, that's already a big victory within education as far as making progress. Because it's that much, it's that difficult to see that progress. Is that
Yeah.
kind of what I'm understanding?
And it's adequate progress, right? So those other students could be making progress, but it's not the adequate progress required, right? Like it's not based on what the expectation of progress is. So that's how they end up kind of from that red to the green, right? So there may be progress being made, but it's not the adequate progress to achieve the desired outcome.
That would also include students who became English learners in that same fall, taking their summative LPAC in the spring. So they would have only been with us, 3/4 of a year. So their progress, expected progress, certainly isn't it's not expected to be as high as, say, the following year when they've had a whole year of instruction in those pieces too. So if you look at it holistically, so that's one reason, like when we look at it, we're like, oh, well, 40, almost 49% wouldn't be making adequate progress. If you look holistically, it would also have those relatively newcomers taking the same
I
assessment.
was gonna say, we have, I mean, newcomers right now who, even at the middle school levels, I just met with the ELs specialists this week. And they said they're doing initial LPACs on new middle school students. They're gonna take the initial and then right away take the summative because we're in the window to do the summative LPAC right now.
So this English learner progress includes newcomers in addition to people who have been,
All.
oh, wow, kind of lumps a big group without really
Oh,
understanding the
mhm.
smaller.
So Becky,
Data
they wanted
point, yeah.
to see how much progress they made from one test to the next. What was it?
In a week. 2 weeks.
So a better way would have been if they classify into smaller subgroups to kind of understand what.
And you'll have that on your LPAC results,
Okay.
right? So on your LPAC results, you'll be able to kind of look at where students are in terms of their designation. Are they long-term English language learners, meaning they've been there for significant amount of time, or are they that initial group? So that'll break it down in that LPAC data.
But in
versus-
terms of creating a dashboard,
Yeah.
no.
That's what I'm saying. Like as far as what the public sees and the data and and dashboards. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's this challenging, yeah. Because this would need several more categories, right? How long has the student been at the district? And ideally, yeah. I get it.
But the state did actually make a positive change recently in terms of sort of giving you credit if you moved within a level rather than just moving level to level. So that was helpful because it in the past you could have been, because they said it does give you a numerical score. You could have barely been a 2, and the next year you were almost out of being a 2, and then they still classified that as you didn't move. And they just changed that recently to sort of say, hey, like we're going to give you credit like within the level if we can see, hey, you moved from being a beginning 2 to like being an ending 2.
The reason I mentioned is because, if I were to be a person of the community, log into my website, say, hey, Lips, how's everything? Wow, 49% of their students are making no progress whatsoever for the English language learners, right?
And
That's what I'm trying to get.
And that's the problem with SBAC is, and I'll say it again, I think it was a very bad creation. I think it doesn't do justice to local education institutions such as ours. Our population base is different than the standard deviation that they want to project. These artificial creation of standards that don't look at local circumstances and local districts, I think it does a disservice. What it does do is for those top line socioeconomically advantaged districts, they get to shine. And so we're comparing apples to oranges. I mean, yes, we're forced to use SBAC. Yes, this is the only information presented to the public. But make no mistake, me personally, I think it's a crap. I'm just going to put it out there. As an educator, most educators agree, this is crap. The fact that this is created by politicians on a national level with very little input from local educators and local districts, I find it abhorrent. Having said that, this is what we have, this is what we have to work with, and I will. However, I'm going to look at more local data and put my value in that than I am ever going to look at some foreign created assessment system that does our student population base no justice whatsoever.
Obviously, I agree, but I do miss, when California had its own system and they used to give you like that 1 through 10. So they used to give you 2 1 through 10 numbers. And the first 1 through 10 number was your students versus the entire state, which that's the number that Neil and I would both say, like apples to oranges, it's not helpful. But the other number was your school versus schools of identical demographics. And that number was really helpful because if you had a low number, you could look at another school that had a high number and be able to, what are they doing? How can I learn from them? Versus right now, the numbers are not helpful because what if all of your children are English fluent, coming in, or everybody had a good breakfast before they came to school kind of thing. It doesn't tell you what you need to do versus the old system. At least I felt like you absolutely could go out and say, I want to find out that school that's a 10 in the similar schools demographic. And that was really helpful.
Absolutely concur.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move us ahead to our local data, which is iReady. And yeah, Krisha and I have been working together with our iReady consultants and doing the benchmarking, supporting the school sites. We just had our second round of PD where the consultants came out and it was really beneficial from what I hear. So this is where our elementary students are in reading right now as an overview. This is our fall benchmark compared to our winter benchmark, which just took place in December. They're expanding. And the iReady test assesses standards for the whole year's worth. So students have not necessarily been taught everything that is presented on the assessment. So the typical achievement goal that you would be looking for right now is 50% because we're about 50% through the school year.
Wait, explain that one more time.
Because we're about 50% through the school year, kids would have learned about 50% of the content of the test so far.
Okay, but how does that impact what you're saying as far as what's get tested?
The whole year's worth is tested.
Oh, got it.
So
Okay.
most students are not going to like ace this test mid-year because they haven't learned everything yet. But we see them growing and that's what we want to see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And have immediate response rather than waiting a whole year for it. I apologize. And, you know, like I was saying earlier, you know, that's why I appreciate these local administered data assessments more because they're relative, they're more frequent, they can make adjustments and they get the results really fast, you know, within a day or two rather than waiting a year or 6 months to make changes in your instruction. So, you know, this is good guiding data that local educators can use to adjust their instruction as needed, you know, given their local population base, rather than comparing us and being driven by another county, another district, or another state-driven data. So I appreciate this
Yeah,
one more.
and that's the great thing about those check-ins with the iReady consultants because the professional was able to sit with grade level teams, talk about their data, help them set some specific goals around that to move students forward. This is our middle school reading. The bottom row is our fall assessment, and then the larger row is the most recent one, which again was December. And again, we can see that red line shrinking. This is elementary by school site. This aligns with the data that we saw from the spring where we can see that Santa Rita does need the most support. So we're going to be working more closely and with them as a targeted site. And this is middle school reading by school site.
Still a lot in the red for the middle school.
Our numbers are very close too between the two school sites.
I was just going to add, I think it's important to know that in middle school, it's easier to be 3 or more grade levels behind, right? If you're in 3rd grade at the elementary,
Right.
it's hard to be 3 grade levels below. So that ability to be below grade level expands as your grade level expands. So if you're a 2nd grader and you're taking this assessment and it says 3 or more grade levels below, that would mean that you're, you know, scoring before kinder. So the ability to have more kids in that red lined area is greater as the grade levels increase more.
Oh, I see. So essentially, I mean, if you're a 4th grader, you're not 3 grades because you have your development, especially what happens in kinder, first and second.
Right. So yeah, so in the 4th grade, you could be in that 3 grade levels below, but that number of students is smaller, right? Versus once you get to middle school, everybody can be 3 grade levels below because there is 3 grade levels below you. But if you're in 2nd and below, there's not as many, the population is smaller who could score that.
And part of that is if they got so far behind, by the time they got to middle school, it's even that much more challenging too.
And it gets harder to catch up.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot. It does grow.
I think when you factor in COVID and you look at that as a moving dip, if you will, that's going through our, if you think of COVID as well, I like to think of COVID as a dip in learning that has been moving year by year by year, affecting each grade. So right now, we're looking at year 4. So if we go 4 years back, the students we currently have are the ones that were affected 4 years ago. So given we're a K through 8 district, I personally think, we still have another 4 years or 5 years of that dip going through our system.
It-
However, what I am seeing is our elementary district, schools somewhat having see that dip pass. Now I'm seeing the growth come back, which is a good sign, You want to see that growth after that dip as it's moving. And so right now, unfortunately, that dip is hitting our middle schools, and we're going to have to sustain that for another 2-3 years, and I'm seeing it at a high school level right now. I have 9th graders who are affected in 5th grade. So what am I seeing? I'm seeing my students have a big hole of learning in grades 4, 5, and 6, especially 5. And so I'm having to teach that stuff that they missed in 5 and 6 and 9. And that's where the learning loss and recovery comes in. So I just want to just share that with you, this idea of that moving dip that's going through our system, and we're in year 4.
Yeah, I hope it's that quick, but I don't know. As a
I'm
second
praying.
grade teacher, I will tell you that even the 1st and 2nd graders that we have, I feel like are significantly behind where they were, because I feel like they didn't have preschool. They didn't have really necessarily organized daycare, maybe something more ad hoc, or parents were trying to work from home. I think they didn't have the language access.
Are you
So
thinking 5-6 years?
I am, and I'm hoping that things will go better, but it's interesting for me as a teacher right now, looking at a class full of students who had all of kindergarten and had all of 1st grade and had all of 2nd grade, and still looking at that cohort, huge challenges compared to cohorts that I've had before. And I'm assuming teachers all over the state are still feeling that, in terms of just the stuff that the language acquisition as 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds didn't have.
So, Sarah, being an elementary school teacher, can you be the canary for us? Let us know.
It just surprises me, because I keep thinking that that I won't notice a global difference, and I'm still noticing a global difference. So I'm hoping that we're going to roll out of this at some point in everything that we're doing. But I said, I still notice it. And I also still notice it in terms of children that were not identified as having special needs at 2 or 3, because they weren't, it's hard to realize that your child doesn't have social skills when they're at home with you, as opposed to like when they're in a preschool setting. So Melanie, I don't know if you've
I
noticed that.
appreciate you
either.
saying that. Yeah, because we're seeing it every day. Yeah.
It made me think, because I just read this research study out of Stanford about this researcher just finished a study around teachers' return post-pandemic. And he was talking about we've focused on the impact to students and that learning loss. But the researcher is finding is that teachers are just now getting back into the rhythm of teaching, because they were also out. So teachers were out, teachers were experiencing their own personal traumas. Teachers were trying to teach virtually and figure that out. And as teachers returned to the classroom, there was an idea that they were just going to be able to jump back in and start where they were. And they were talking, this research study is all around teacher recovery post-pandemic. And so that now, as we start to go, teachers are now finally getting back into the rhythm and understanding of what students' needs. They're getting themselves back to what needs to happen. And so I think as much as we have to look at our students and their recovery, a huge piece of it is, our teachers were also impacted by the pandemic. And so their return also takes time in recovery as we come back. So it was a really interesting study.
Yeah, I did have some friends that are educators, and one of them, she's been a principal, assistant principal, teacher, and whatever. And she mentioned because I talked to her 2 years ago. I said, "Hey, do you feel student behavior is up?" She says it is, but I also feel when I talk to my colleagues that our patience for behavior is less than it was
Exactly.
pre-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Because she says, like, a lot of us, I felt like we had these issues before because I would talk to them and they would tell me about this, but I feel like now we're on a shorter fuse. It's understandable because you come out of the pandemic and it comes on. So
Well, and students that are academically behind, right? We typically will see that connected to student behavior, right?
And I'm gonna introduce a third factor, and that is besides COVID and that is the social construct that we're living in. This lack of trust in our institutions, this vocal, vile nature that, it's becoming forefront in news and board meetings, etc. That I think it lends towards similar behavior amongst our students. They learn from adults, and when they see people fighting back, being very vocal, being disruptive, being very disrespectful,
Mm-hmm.
and they see that it is more and more acceptable behavior in the adult world, then why should they not practice that, what they learn from what they see? So I think there's a dual-edged sword here that we're fighting, and so we need to be aware of that. And, once again, that's an additional pressure placed on students and parents and staff, and so those are the confines we live in. And so I think that also helps is causational towards a decrease of our learning.
Okay, as we move on, this is our a multi-year comparison. So last year's winter diagnostic compared to this year's for elementary. It's looking about the same. Mm-hmm. And for middle school. Mm-hmm.
And I concur with this. I do a reading assessment in ninth grade, and vast majority of my students are 2 to 3, some even 4 grade levels behind. And it used to be 1 to 2, and after COVID, it jumped another 2 to 3 years. And so that learning loss from lack of reading skills and reading levels that you gain from incremental reading, we've lost. And there's only one way to get back, and that is reading. There's no other magic solution.
Mm-hmm.
So we in the high school, and we focus completely on reading, make sure every freshman is reading. You bring an AR book. We're doing AR scores. You have to read so many, and boom, 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 boom. And we are noticing that it does make a difference, and relatively fast. It doesn't take 3 years to increase 3 years. You can do that in
Right.
one if it's targeted. So even though we're stagnant right now, I think there are solutions out there that we can probably look into later on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then by English learner designation. So the top 2 lines are showing fall to winter for our students who are classified as English learners. And the bottom in the gray is fall to winter for students who are not English learners. Again, it's that emphasis that we need to be placing on increasing our English learners' access to this learning.
We also, for part of redesignating English learners, you have to have multiple data points, right? To be able to RFEP a student and redesignate them. So sometimes one of the benefits of our in-house assessment is that is one of our data points. So sometimes and test scores never come in the most timely manner, right? So by the time we get our summative LPAC scores, a lot of times actually what we're waiting on is the very first iReady window for an EL to take that assessment, because we're waiting on one additional data point. So we actually RFEP quite a number of our English learners in the fall after we get that first data point, because we were waiting for that last thing that we needed for them to show their proficiency on. So when we do the reclassification and those things, I mean, we try to do it in the most timely manner. And sometimes what we're waiting on is the second window, right? And then we can redesignate a student because we're waiting on that data point.
And then this is the middle school by EL designation. Moving us into math.
Sorry, can we go back for just a second? I just want to talk about this data point for a second, where the yes English learner, this is where we're talking about long-term ELs, and this is where we need to really be talking about what we're doing. Like in terms of a lot of these kids have come in, you know, kindergarten, first grade, and they're stuck. And that's true all across the state, but it's just, how are we addressing that specific issue?
A lot of them, significant amount, don't come from our district.
Absolutely, that you get them all, you get somebody as a fifth grader and you were not responsible for what happened before, you get them as an eighth grader and you were not responsible for what happened before, but just I feel like this is a statewide challenge and something that we personally need to think about what we're doing.
I am excited about the new ELD curriculum that we launched this year for our 4th through 8th graders, English 3D. And so I'm hopeful that that's going to have a really positive impact because of the way that it's structured and designed, and the teachers seemed to be really buying into it. Okay, so this is math elementary. We looked at this briefly. The red definitely shrunk and the green is growing. And middle school math. This is the elementary math by school site. And middle school math by school site. Yes. Looks like New Republic. With La Jolla right behind. Here's the elementary math by English learner designation. And in our math these days, language is a really critical component. And so what we saw in reading is going to be reflected in math, as you can see.
Absolutely concur with that, Becky. I know with the new math standards, we flipped it upside down. It used to be 90% straight
Numbers.
numerical.
Yeah.
Word problems. Now it's 90% word problems. There's a direct correlation between. So based on what I say is when we focused on reading in the high school level, in 9th grade, it had a direct effect on that. Way more than previous years. Previous years, it wasn't that great. But with the new math systems, it's essential. The language. So, once again, you want to help math, you can do that by reading.
Yes. And here's middle school math by EL designation. Comparing winter to winter for math, this is elementary. So just like we saw with reading, it's looking about the same. and middle school. Okay, so that is our local data. If you want to take a few seconds and jot down some notes.
Now would be a good time to take a break. We're going to segue into our climate and then budget. And yeah.
Like, I don't want to go.
It's been kind of mind blowing how many students we get where it's like almost even like severe autism and there's no like pediatrician referral, medical diagnosis. So we've been really partnering with the pediatric groups in the area to like, here's the assessment report. We've qualified them as, you know, having autism with the ADOS, obviously not a medical diagnosis, like just trying because it's just so hard to place students appropriately. I was in a meeting this week with, you know, there's a little guy, kinder, parents a teacher in our district. And I'm just like, we got to get this kid services, like no speech and language, like we're doing an AAC assessment. It's just, I've never seen anything quite like it. Personal. Yeah, but and it's supposed to, you know, like somewhere along the spectrum, something. Pediatrician wouldn't feel like I was crazy. Yeah. Like, legit. That's how she made me feel. Like, when you voice concerns. Behavioral issue now, and I was like, yeah. Okay, I'm crazy. I can do this. What I'm saying is it's ridiculous because a lot of parents Yeah.
All right, we'll give it 30 seconds.
I'll be right back. I'm gonna mad dash.
So now we're going to look at my favorite topic, school climate. I think this is important to discuss. This was, again, that AI generated statement from all the comments that are there. So just so that the community hears, I'll read it. The responses indicate a variety of safety concerns in the school environment. These include physical safety with mentions of student-on-student assaults and the need for stronger disciplinary measures. There's also a focus on mental health with calls for more proactive measures to address students' mental health challenges. The need for a safe and welcoming environment is emphasized with the suggestion that students learn better when they feel secure. Some participants also mentioned the importance of safety during school drop-off and pickup times. Overall, the participants seem to perceive safety as a critical aspect of the school environment that needs continuous attention and improvement. I'm going to sit a little bit close to you, sorry. No, you're good, you're good, you're good. So this is looking at school climate, which is one of those measures on the dashboard. The way that school climate is calculated for the dashboard is solely on suspension rates. That's how it's calculated. So that's why it's important that we look at other options or other pieces as well. So on the dashboard for suspension rates or school climate, we're in the orange with nobody in the red. So again, if we're looking at this in terms of writing of our LCAP, it says we don't technically have to have a specific district action around suspension rates. Now, of course, we're going to do that because we want to continue to grow. We were in the red in our previous year, so we've made that progress to the orange. We want to stay there as well. You'll see that it says there's an increase in that of 0.5%, but we're still in the red because we moved to the orange based on our population. So the calculation is odd, right? The number of students. We had 3.6% of our students suspended last year. It's also important as we look at the next table to keep in mind that currently even our alternative to suspension program counts as a suspension because they're being removed from their school setting, their traditional classroom and school setting. Right now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about another piece, but I'm working with the state to kind of figure out a way where we can actually, because they are getting access to their core curriculum from a teacher who can provide that, there's might be a way for us to not count that within our suspension percentage because they're getting access to the learning, but we're not there yet. So. You'll see in the table here that that first column is year to date. So this data we put in, I updated it yesterday. So compared to this same time last year, so same time to same time. Currently, our out of school suspensions for this year are 86. Last year, we were at 58. So we've actually increased our suspension rate, which is not what I want to see. In our alternative to suspension, we've served 36 students. Last year, we were at 35 students. So we're increasing the number of students in ATS. Again, keeping in mind that that's only serving 4th through 8th graders currently. We had 3 expulsions by this time last year, and this year we have 0. We conducted, I think I remember sharing with you last year, we weren't collecting in our ARIES system the data around suicide risk assessment and behavioral threat assessment last year. We added that into our system so that we can collect that data. So now anytime a suicide risk assessment is completed or a behavioral threat assessment is completed, it's recorded and we can pull a report. So far this year, we've done 43 suicide risk assessments. That is significantly lower than the number last year, even though we didn't collect the data. I have a separate spreadsheet, but it's not viable, so I don't want to put it in there. I mean, it's not reliable. And then in behavioral threat assessment, we've completed 12 this year as well.
Summer,
yeah.
sorry, we'd previously talked that a bunch of the suspensions this year were actually little tiny people.
They were.
Okay. Yeah, just clarifying.
Yeah. Many of them were our TK or kinder through 3rd.
I'd like to say a couple of words here. you know, I, as an educator and as a board member, I get very upset when this is the data that the national education system came up with to share with public in terms of how successful a school is. This is absolute BS. The idea that we as educators, as an institution, our primary job is to educate. The idea that the outside pressures come into our institutions and force us to take steps outside of the educational process in order so we can educate. So we have suspensions, we have therapies, we have behavioral science, whatever it may be to us to help, to make a difference. And then the outside world comes and points to the education systems as the problem, when this is not our problem. We are addressing the problem that has been created by the outside world that is bleeding into the educational system. So I find it abhorrent and diametrically oppressive to the school systems to base us on outside pressures that we have no control over, and yet we're the number one people fighting to create a change for a positive, and yet we're the ones who are scapegoated. I find it very abhorrent. So to the public out there, this is the truth. Before you start blaming schools, look at yourselves. Look at our society. Look at what we're doing outside of the school that creates pressure inside. We as educators are doing good. We're trying the best we can. But how dare you assess us based on things that we have zero control over? And yet the ones who are creating the problems, who are part of the problems, are the ones judging us. Thank you.
With that, I want to add on this slide a little bit of information kind of based on what you see here and from the discussions at our board meeting, the presentations at our board meeting the other day. Since our board meeting, I've been reaching out to a few different entities to explore what's happening, right? What options are out there. I have notes here so I don't forget as well. So I talked first with Dan Sackheim, who is the CDE lead around alternative programming. Alternative programming includes alt ed. It includes community day schools, opportunity programs as well. I spent a very long time on the phone with him yesterday, about an hour and 20 minutes talking through those different options. That conversation with Dan came about before, after my timeline is off because I was sick yesterday, but in speaking with the Boys and Girls Club about looking at some alternative options for a student who maybe needs a reduced day, we were notified by the amazing team there that Hardin Middle School started an opportunity class. And that opportunity class is going to be those students are going to the Boys and Girls Club at 12:30. So they have a modified day. They go to the Boys Club at 12:30. Based on that, I reached out to Dr. Juan Mendoza, who is Director of Pupil Personnel Services, who I happen to know from Migrant for many years. Reached out to Dr. Mendoza, who put me in contact with Ray Santa Ana at Hardin, who's leading that opportunity program. Spoke pretty extensively with Ray around what that programming is. Was a little bit confused because in some ways I couldn't kind of match it with what we have. So spoke with Dan Stockheim, who does that. I think it's really important for our community to know that we don't have the option for an opportunity program. Opportunity programs, if you had a program established prior to 2004, you could continue to have a program. So in 2004, make sure I get this right. In 2004, Assembly Bill 825 was passed, a block grant that ended opportunity schools for any new opportunity programming. Salinas Union High School District had an opportunity program previous to 2004 because they're a high school district. Most high school districts did. That's why Hardin Middle School can have that program. We have never had an opportunity school or an opportunity program. Therefore, it is not an option for our district. So within that alternative education category, there's two other there, which is you can have a alt ed program, which is really serving students traditionally 16 and above who are credit deficient or who are coming from incarceration. All of these are schools of choice or programs of choice. None of them can be mandated programming, number one. So alt ed is not an elementary school program. What they switched to really after that, and Elva will remember this as well, is community day schools, which is really the only option that we have as an elementary district. The only place that's had a community day school kind of within that elementary level is Baldwin Park in Salinas City. And I don't know if you remember that, but it was challenging. It was a challenging program. Community day schools cannot be held on a campus, on a school campus. They have to be in an alternate location, number one. They have a very small student to teacher ratio. They're usually focused around students who have chronic absenteeism, behavioral challenges, very expensive programs to run, mostly because they can't take place on your campus. They also have to run within your grade span. Those community day schools cannot be a collaborative unless they're run by a county office of ed. So we as a district could not say like, hey, Alisal, hey, Salina City, let's get together and do this. One district could run it and you could inter-district students into it. But we can't kind of do it as a collaborative unless run by a COE. The COEs under this block grant can also operate opportunity programs. Districts just can't, who didn't have it previously established. And then I spoke with and emailed Dr. Ruiz de Velasco, who's the lead researcher at Stanford University around alternative education programs. And he just recently completed a report with lots of COEs called, let me make sure I do it right. He leads the California Advisory Task Force on Alternative Education. And what that came about was that what they found, and Krisha has lived this reality, is that, students were kind of put into these alternative programs. There wasn't the accountability on the dashboard in the same way for alternative programs. And they call them kind of the forgotten children, right? Kids were kind of sent to these programs, and yet they weren't monitored in the same ways as other programming. I think it's important to know that for any of these programs, there also has to be a plan, an individualized plan that moves students out of that program back into their general programming. So for us right now, I just want our community to know as well, we can't duplicate what Hardin has, for example, because that's not an option on the table for us. We do not qualify for an opportunity program. So if we were looking for similar types of programming where our options are, and I'm going to continue to investigate, I have meetings set with both of them with our cabinet, is the community day school route is really the option that we have. And that's takes some extensive planning, again, like Baldwin Park did. Yeah.
I think it's a great idea, first of all, but I think having it done through MCOE would be probably the most cost beneficial for us,
Yeah.
they have locations, or we could choose another district to have our classes in that doesn't participate in it. But I think having MCOE do it and sharing the cost amongst districts who send students there, is that something the board think we should look into? I mean,
And I have a meeting with Brett McFadden just to kind of talk through some of those because he's overseeing the student services division of MCOE. So I do have that said as well. We met at our safety committee on Friday, but we didn't have time to talk through this topic.
I apologize. I didn't mean to limit that as the only option.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to explore any and all options,
Yeah.
and just bring them back to the board and we can discuss it and explore them, but we definitely need to move forward.
Yeah. And I just think it's really important for our community to know that we are it's not, we hear you and we are looking into what are the options that are available. As an elementary district, that's what makes us very different than some of the districts that we're looking at. The high school district is different. Unified school districts that have a high school are at a different place. As an elementary district, it's just a little bit of a different scenario. Sir.
Yes, I'm interested in exploring with the county, talk to them. The other question that I have, do we have the capacity, like at our middle school level to create something that would be optional to families, but doing something like, hey, we're going to have a 6th grade. We've identified kids that we feel like need more support. We're going to have a 6th grade where we're going to have like a half day that's combined. You have your language arts, you have your social studies, you have your math, like all in one room, so that it's more like a single subject thing. Eliminate some transitions for the children doing things like this. You still go to music, you still go to PE, but part of the problem, in my opinion, for students who struggle is having to deal with so many different personalities and so many changes across the day.
Yeah.
Do we have an ability to create something that people can opt into to take down the variables?
So in terms of can we create that in alignment with CD? Yes, because we're an elementary district, we could have a K-8 where they're all together all day, every grade level. We don't have a requirement to do periods, right? Because they're not credits. We could have everybody be a multiple subject teacher and everybody could be there kind of thing. So yes, we could have, a group. I had that, I think I told at Hardin, when I taught at Hardin for that period of time, I taught a self-contained general ed class because they were opening La Paz and they didn't want to hire a math and English, a science. So they hired 2 of us to teach self-contained. So our kids stayed with us for everything except P and their elective. So yes, I guess that was a long answer to say yes.
I feel like we need to explore every option and talk about what would be helpful or not. And I also don't have a problem trying out something and deciding that we hate it and
Yeah.
then not repeating it, but just in terms of, how can we have more options to take care of kids?
And I'm hoping to get either Dr. Ruiz Velasco or one of the other members of this task force to come and speak with us as well, so that they can give us the information, not just about the programming available, but what they found in their 2-year research study across the board. They mostly focused on COEs because that's where most programs are housed out of. But yeah, so my hope is that I can get them in and have a community meeting. We could also invite in our teachers to hear.
What's COE?
A county office of ed. Thank you.
Sarah, I concur with that. I mean, for many years, we thought by just moving students along in English and with the regular classroom, that the differentiated instruction the teachers would provide would, carry them through. That is not true. In the high school level, we stopped and said, you know what, we're going to provide the additional math support. You're going to get the instruction from your main teacher as much as possible, but you're also going to have a math support where they're going to help you do that homework, help fill in the gaps that you didn't learn in class because you did that additional support. And after 2, 3 years, then they're off of that support, but it increased graduation levels because along the way, when they had that single class, the pressure went too high, they fell behind, and that affected the other classes as well. So I like the idea of having additional support or an alternate program of education within the confines of that same school. That's something to explore.
Yeah. We just have to be.
Just a really quick question. I remember Baldwin School. So are you saying that it would be similar to Baldwin School?
That's our kind of our only option in terms of an alternative programming is to have, because Baldwin Park was a community day school. What we have as an elementary district that we could do is a community day school.
Okay, as I remember, it was in a different
It can't be on your campus.
So it was, I think, on Park Street.
It was, yeah, an office building. Yeah, it can't be on your campus. Even like you can't put portables in the parking lot of your campus and hold it there. There is a piece that he told me about a 2/3 vote. So you could have, and don't quote me, I think it was a community vote, but I'm not positive. It might have been a board vote. He was very informative. It was a very long conversation. So 2/3 vote, and you could have it within parameters. So I think it's like that school community where you're putting this program with a 2/3 vote, you could have it there, but he said that was hard to do. So.
Okay. Do you know why it was dissolved, the program?
The opportunity programs, because of the inequity that was found within them mostly. So with that SB 825 or Assembly Bill 825, they said, okay, what they're really looking towards is what that was doing was really, again, moving students into programming that they were never getting out of.
Okay. And then all I remember, I don't know whether I'm for it or not, because I've had students whose brothers or sisters were in those programs. And it was the stigma of the bad kids.
For sure.
I think I think what Summer said earlier, I think the emphasis, and I'm going to support that 100%, is the main focus should be bringing them back. This is not a permanent long-term solution. This is a stopgap measure to take students away from the situation and their peers and whatever drama's happening, give them the time to rehabilitate, give them the educational loss and work on that. And then at some point, bring them back. This is never a permanent
Long
solution,
term.
you know?
And I don't think Baldwin did that. Or
It,
the Baldwin
it
school.
didn't last long enough.
No.
Yeah, there was a lot there. And I think, you know, again, for me, as I spoke to these individuals, the other thing to really keep in mind is that in reality, we're in a, and I guess this is also kind of my CSUMB professor hat. You know, we had over, I think it was 3,000 decline in enrollment into the teacher ed program. We know that we're facing a teacher crisis in general. And so my concern is, you know, also when we're thinking about programming like this, we have to think about staffing it, right? And the staffing has to take priority, because for a program to be successful, serving your most at-risk kids, you need your most skilled educators. You know, again, one of the other challenges with opportunity program that Dan shared with me is that the requirements for opportunity programs is only 180 minutes of instruction. And what they know is that the students who are being put into a program, an opportunity program, need the most amount of instruction. So they don't need shorter days, they need more time with meaningful adults. And so that's another piece behind it. Community day schools have the full 360-minute requirement. Students must be in programming for that full 360 minutes. So, you know, when I think about why our larger districts haven't done these programs, ALISAL, who have a much bigger pool, partially it's the reality is we have to think through all the pieces of it. You know, we can have it if you can't adequately staff it with highly qualified staff prepared to serve the students, the impact is actually going to be greater. We're gonna cause more harm than good. And so I think it's a big conversation where, you know, there's lots of information to be gathered in order to do that. But
Thank you for that. Sorry, Neil. That was my other piece right there, is the staffing. I'm really concerned about the staffing of these community schools.
their recommendation is like a 1 to 3.
Yeah.
So
You
with
know,
certificated. So.
we do have opportunity at Dallas Valley High School, and the two things that are paramount is exactly what you just said. One, by far, is who's teaching it. It has to be superstars.
Yeah.
You know, with the patience of Zen. You know, and however, the other component that is almost as important is the curriculum.
Yeah.
If it's strictly computer-based recovery, no. Not in an elementary, middle school level. It has to be recovery of learning and growth.
Yeah. And with opportunity, that's the other piece. In an opportunity program, it didn't require use of adopted curriculum. That's the other reason probably that it got put out. Community day school has to use state adopted curriculum. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, going off of what Sarah was saying, hearing, you know, these different things. Having that option of actually having it in our school sites, seeing the kids that need this additional support and whatnot, and having them like at a teacher that does all the subjects. Obviously very talented patients, because as we heard in our last board meeting, you know, these kids also are, you know, experiencing things, being vocal, being, you know, all of these things that they need additional support, but we would be able to do that, correct? If we were to look at that, would we be able to do something within our schools? Not necessarily a program, but more of like, okay, we identify these students that need these additional help and have these educators that are top tier and be able to work with these individuals so they could be more concentrated instead of going from 6 different teachers' personalities to being with one and having them there. Would that be a possibility?
So I mean, it's one of the things that we really need to work through, because it can be considered tracking, right? So you could be that you're tracking students into that, which we don't want. The other part is it's not just, you can't have opportunity schools, that we have to be cautious that we're not creating an opportunity class, because classes and schools is the same thing, right? So we have to be really cognizant of how we're doing that. He did share an example, you know, where people try these workarounds that are not really effective, where they basically say like, Jacob's an awesome teacher, let's just put all those kids with Jacob. And there has been some litigation that's come back and said like, wait, you're doing that, right? So, I mean, I think it's one of those areas that we just have to think about. You know, if something is short term, like our alternative to suspension, where a kiddo can go in there, get some supports, they're not receiving the majority of their learning within that space and return, that's different, right? But if we're saying, hey, you know, this group of kids goes here. Now, like what Sarah was talking about, if we said we're going to offer one 6th grade cohort group that are self-contained, and parents, you get to elect that program option. It has to be a program of choice. So, and parents, we couldn't mandate kneel to that program. We could just say, we have this option for your student, or we encourage your child to attend. Now, even within the opportunity programs within the high school district, it's a program of choice unless mandated. There's part of their board policy includes aspects of it in which they can be required to attend. And that has to do around truancy, and it has to do around discipline rates. But other than that, it's still a program of choice. So yes, we could do something like that. It would be a program of choice unless we created something that's different, and then we'd have to walk the line.
And I think it's a larger discussion, I think.
It's a huge
because I think
discussion.
people, like a lot of times, either teachers or parents, like if a kid's not doing well or gets in trouble, a lot of times there's two perceptions. One is
Mhm.
he's never, or that she's never going to do well. So
Right.
that's why we need to have an alternative to education, as
Right.
opposed to like they just need a couple support services. They get back on track and now they're good.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there is a train of thought of some comments of people that feel like, no, we just need them out of our schools altogether, because there's no way that they're going to get back on track.
Yeah. And I think it's really a similar idea. And again, like I love my folks running the wellness centers in Salinas Union. I work really closely with them. But one of the challenges that I have, and I think I've shared with this board before in the research that I've done around wellness centers, is it says to a child, you're only well here. Like if you want to be okay, you go to this space. And unless you have a really good team that brings that back around and takes that student back in and helps create wellness in Mr. Patel's class, then the perception becomes, if I'm not well in Mr. Patel's class, sorry, you're just right class. Well, I have to go to a wellness center and get well because I can't be well there. And, you know, it can be a respite. It can be a space where I go and take a breath. But if without that circling back around to say, why are you not well at lunchtime? Why are you not well in the cafeteria? Why are you not well in PE, and working to make that space well? Then it's always somewhere I have to go to be well. And so we just have to be careful in anything that removes something and puts it somewhere else, because unless we're working on the root cause of like what's happening here, and we're not just using that as a respite piece, then it can start to kind of just detract, and it does become really hard to come back. So if I've been sent to this opportunity program and I'm being really successful there because I have meaningful adults, I have more attention, I have the social emotional supports I need, but yet I know that in this space, I'm not going to have that, then how do I transition? Right. And so it just becomes that challenge. And so, you know, the same thing as we look at those opportunity for wellness, actually, I think I shared with you, but the research has shown that wellness spaces are both best utilized by the adults, that a teacher has a wellness center, that teacher takes a break into that, gets what they need, regroups, thinks about it, and returns to the space, because then they're more able to serve a student. So there's one district in LA that's doing a reverse. They took all their wellness center back and gave it to teachers. So, which I'd love to do that
Yeah,
for them.
what I
too.
was going to mention is, and I'm going to reach out to the teacher that came to speak at our public comments. That's what I was going to ask for their contact. But when he did that, he mentioned his thought. I forgot what he called it and stuff. And you know, if a student comes into your classroom and your fear, like I have a lot of friends that are teachers in different cities and stuff. And one of my friends, he always tells me, whenever there's a kid that cusses me out after class, I'll be like, hey, what's going on? Like, did I do something? Did I like, what am I missing in the connection? You know, so when he thought that thought experience, and I'm like, if there's, my brother's done this too at city council meetings, whenever somebody comes up angry at him, after the meeting, he's like, why are you angry at me?
Yeah.
You know, like what is causing you to have this angry that you want to cause harm to me? And that's what I wanted to have this conversation with him later on, was because I think with a lot of teachers, if you have students that are disruptive, I think that's where the extra effort comes from the teacher to be like, what is causing you to have
Mhm.
this? Is it something
Yeah.
in me? Is it something going on at home? Like, what's kind of the challenge
Yeah.
there?
And I think it goes back to a little bit what Mr. Patel was saying earlier too, is that we're in a heightened sense of fear in our society, right? So, you know, if I'm going to the garlic festival, I'm more on alert now because we've had more mass shootings in public events like that. So I'm thinking about things more cautiously. So we can't expect that we know that in general, our educators are coming in with this heightened sense, right? And so that's part of what that research study was looking at too. Like our educators are also recovering from society, but our job is to kind of think through that and say, you know, this is where I'm at now and how do we support each other in that? And I think that a lot of that is supported by that sense of community that we can create in a school, not just for our students, but for our educators as well. Okay. So this is just really quick as we kind of go through it. This is when we think about climate, it's really important to look at who responded in our thought exchange. So these are some of the numbers. So we had 244 participants total in that thought exchange. 85 of those were staff, 139 were parents or guardians, and 13 were community members. I also sent it out to our community partners. 122 individual thoughts were shared. So that's where somebody typed something out in there. And you can see below as well from the participants which categories make up those. And then total ratings were 2,676. So that means of those 122 comments, that rating in the stars, 2,676 ratings occurred within that. And then what school students come from? So 3% people came from the district office. You can see those remaining numbers down there. So a really good output for our first thought exchange. Really good participation. This is that word cloud that we talked about. These are words that appear anywhere within any of those comments. This isn't live, but if you go on to that thought exchange, you can click on, talk about assaults because that's the one we talked about before. If you click on that within the word cloud, it'll open up the comments associated with it. So it'll show you every comment that's connected to a word that's there as well. And everybody has access to that. So if they want to know, like, why are they talking about, staff? Sorry, that was really odd. Talking about staff, they can click on that every comment that has staff on it. Now those are not based on, it's based on the rating. So assault maybe only was written two times, but the number of people who rated it is where it falls into this word cloud. But I encourage you to go in there and look. Yeah. Neil, your microphone.
Just a couple of comments, this chart is associated with what people, their belief based on their perception.
Mhm.
And my issue with this, and it's not necessarily negative, is the fact that as having taught for almost a quarter century, we are not having more fights than we did 20 years ago.
Yeah,
We're not
I agree.
having more issues. What we are having an issue with is more cameras, more recordings, and that explodes on the internet, explodes on the
agree.
media, and then it blows up to those situations that have been occurring. Now it's just more exposed to the point where people finally are like, oh, that's been happening. Hello, it's been here forever.
Mhm.
And so I think there's this hypersensitivity that you mentioned earlier that's going on. So when I'm looking at this and I see the word assault, I see save, I see some cautionary words that give me some idea of issues with safety. And yet, when I look at it and knowing it as a teacher, that's not necessarily true on a data proven level.
Yeah.
There's a perception issue out there, and media is not serving us any
Yeah.
bit of justice
Yeah.
on this. If the truth is you're alarmed now with the fights, then why weren't you alarmed 5 years ago,
Mm.
or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago? Oh, the reason is because now it's in media and you see the visual effects.
Yeah.
But it's always been there.
I think we also have had, as a school, have had more focus on. I was talking to Melanie about something else during the break, but again, I'm reading this book around thought patterns. And one of the things I was talking about is kind of like, where your focus is where your feeling is. So I gave her the example one that if my focus is the gym's going to make me feel great, when I get in there, then I'm like more likely to feel great versus like me when I'm driving the gym, I'm like, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to hate it the whole time. Right. So then I get in there and it's terrible and I hate it the whole time. So where your mind is where that's at. We as a society have increased our focus on safety. We're doing safety trainings. We've never done those before. We're doing drills. We've never done those before. We're doing We've increased. We have anonymous reporting for students. Nobody anonymously reported when I was in school. We just didn't tell anybody probably. I don't know what happened. So yeah, you just didn't tell anybody. So because we've done more of that, it is on our minds, right? So we are more likely to see it and we're more likely to perceive it at a higher level of danger because we don't do drills for things. We don't teach about things that aren't important. And so if we're doing that, which is necessary because of the times we're in, but if we're doing that, then our perception is if we see it, it must be more important for us to focus on it, right? Because that's what we've created. And again, unfortunately necessary because of the times we live in, and that's a reality. But I think this reflects that, right? We're saying to parents, hey, we're focused on safety. Here's all the things we're doing for safety, support on safety. So when something happens that's unsafe, we perceive it at a higher level than maybe we did before as well. So I think all of those pieces play into it.
There's also a piece that we don't have the same norms of polite conversation
Not at all,
that we
yeah.
used to have. So you may not be hitting people, but you're speaking in a way
Mhm.
that is significantly different and it's perceived as a threat.
Absolutely.
So I think that there's just the social construct has changed in that way, and we're not all on the same page about
Yeah.
that. And again, you could have someone who speaks very aggressively who would absolutely never ever hurt
Right.
anybody, but
Right.
it's just it changes how you interact with that
For sure.
person.
And we have different perspectives, right? I know that my view is skewed. I started out in the therapeutic intervention program, which is TIP now, but it used to be severely emotionally disturbed. Like that's where my teaching career started, my social work career started. So like there's very little that kids can do or in group homes, right? Like there's very little a student can do that like phases me, but if that's not been your experience and a student comes up and cusses at you and that's never been your experience, it's going to feel very different. If a student comes up to me and does that, I'm like, hey, what's going on, right? Because my experience has changed my radar for what things are. So we have to realize that plays into it, everybody's radar in there. So some of the themes that we saw come up around campus behavior is a need for alt ed program for mainstream students with extreme behaviors. Having a specialized program for students will allow teachers to teach the rest of the class. Somebody noted that they think discipline could improve. Where it's bold is the title that they put in, and then under that is kind of the sub comment that they can add. So it's the same person. Students think that any behavior is acceptable and more effective consequences for physical violence, assaults, and fights on campus. Physically assaulting other students or staff has serious consequences to prevent more incidents in the future.
So really quick, I know because that's a recurrent theme in our
Yeah.
comments. At least personally as a board member, I don't think more discipline discourages a student from doing something.
Correct.
When I was in middle school, I remember, I don't know how often attention gets given now,
Mhm.
but I remember at Gavin, they would give attention for like everything and I
Yeah.
would still forget my pencil.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like me getting attention for forgetting my pencil did not make me forget it. I just forgot
Right.
it. I was like, shoot, I'm gonna get attention again.
Yeah.
So I think they don't in the moment that you're going through those emotions, you're not really thinking about the consequences of their discipline.
Right. And it's similar for days of suspension, right? There's not something magical that happens on day 5. So if a student has a behavior and we've suspended them for 1 day, and if we say, now let's suspend them for 5 days, there's nothing between day 1 and day 5 in most cases that's going to happen that on day 5, they're going to come back. And that perception is based on an idea that punitive consequence is going to, at home, something's going to happen that's going to make that student say, I don't want to do that anymore. What we know is for many of our students, the trauma that they're coming that's causing the behavior is happening in the home. So when we send them for that 5th day, they're actually more likely to come back with more challenges for us because we've sent them into the environment, into the space that's caused the trauma to begin with. And so, that's part of why the state has required progressive discipline, and they've limited certain discipline suspension areas that you cannot suspend 1st through 3rd grade, because there's been no research that's shown a correlation between suspension and improvements in behavior. Again, suspension is most effective if you're using it for your team to regroup, put a plan into place, support that student when they return.
I would agree, but you have to be doing something for the other students too,
Absolutely.
and that's just basic example. But when I was a kindergarten teacher and you bit someone in my classroom,
Yeah.
you had to go to the office.
Mhm.
I knew that the office was not going to help you to
Right.
not be a biter, but it was
Give you a
going
break,
to
time to.
reinforce to everybody else that we don't bite and a timeout for that person. So I feel like there has to be something to the other student
Yeah.
sort of acknowledging that that was scary for you.
Yeah.
How can we,
Yeah.
deal with that situation too?
And that's the role of our restorative practice leads. We have 2 at each site now. And that's the goal with them.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say we shouldn't have any discipline.
No,
I'm just
yes,
saying
I agree.
Increasing it doesn't necessarily mean that you're.
No,
I agree. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry, Summer.
No, no.
I'm very big on open communication. I think a lot of the issue where I'm hearing from parents and staff, but mainly from parents, is they don't know the limitations we have. I'm constantly reminding people, hey, we have limitations. We can't do that. The law prevents us, this, that. And I think we could go a long way in educating our own staff and especially our parents and our stakeholder groups that, we need to make those limitations more aware.
Yeah.
The idea that automatically a 2nd grade, suspend them, well, why did that come into your construct? If it's illegal, we can't do it, then that shouldn't even come up as an option. But by you constantly barking that over and over and over doesn't make it legal.
Yeah.
And it's not going to convince me to do it because I'm not going to break the law.
Yeah.
And the data research shows it's not, 100% effective.
Right.
So for all these reasons, but it all starts with communicating information.
Yeah.
Letting them know their limitations and what they are, and being a little bit more vocal and out there with that information,
And we've done quite a bit of training with the staff, especially around progressive discipline and the discipline matrix. You kind of saw them reference it in the public comment as well. It's hard because it is also a perception piece, right? So there's humans involved. And I think that's also really the hard part because I, as the person making the decision, may not perceive it in the same way as somebody else listening to it. And I think that's why what I agree with you wholeheartedly on is that's where that communication between administration and the teachers. Again, we've given the example that, our goal is always for a teacher to not be the one, a principal to not necessarily be the one inflicting whatever the consequences, positive, negative, whatever, but that teacher has an opportunity to spend that time with the student and talk through the issue and the concern and come back. Because so often we send the student to the office, the principal gets the whole story, right? They get the whole piece of what happened. The other day, an example, by the time I got the student, I heard it was his birthday. Nobody had said happy birthday to him. He missed his haircut. Like there was a whole thing that had happened. The teacher missed out on that. And because we're busy, the administrator makes a decision based on the big picture. That maybe pieces get communicated back to the teacher because there's not time, not because they don't want to. So the teacher's perception is, well, nothing happened, right? Because they didn't get the opportunity for that whole story. And what our goal is as a district is to say, we want you as the teacher to get that whole story and help us make a good decision because that student's returning to you in that situation. So the more opportunities we can have for somebody to come take Mr. Patel's class so Mr. Patel can be part of that, the better the outcome is going to be. Because if it's made in isolation, then it's done to you as a teacher and not done with you as a teacher.
And maybe that could be part of, I think, the teacher's perception of what their job is. Because I think
Mindset.
what I hear on comments sometimes is more like the disciplinary on that end is not my responsibility. That's why I sent them to the office and you're supposed to deal with the situation. 'Cause I
It
think
never
when you
works.
mentioned that before, you miss out on that opportunity. I think the feeling I get when I speak to teachers is more, it's like, wait, you're gonna have me do that as well?
Right.
Like
Yeah,
an extra
it's true.
task within their
Mhm.
work and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're looking at some ideas about how to do more of that and get some of these folks in. All right. So any of we asked a lot of them, but essential questions, you can jot those down as we go too. As you do that, we're going to start to look at chronic absenteeism. I'm like, wait a second.
This is me. Sorry, I didn't jump up for it. Thank you. Perfect. So we're gonna just dive right in and keep moving.
We're right on time.
Ooh, we're right on time, even with comments. That's
I
awesome.
was watching Becky to see.
Yeah, we put in some benchmarks.
Oh, good. I thought we were behind.
No, we're good. Yesterday was like, let's.
That's good. You know, super, you're gonna have to buy me lunch.
Okay, sorry, Mel.
No problem, you guys. It's funny. Okay, so this is our 2023 chronic absenteeism data. We're looking at district-wide data. Again, this pointer doesn't work, but in the first, you can kind of see the breakdown of different subgroups. And then there's pieces that don't have a performance color, right?
You make you want it to go down.
This is the one we.
You want it to go down, which it took me a little while looking at the slide, but I'm like, yes, this is actually good news for us. So we're at 22.6 chronically absent. We've declined or decreased by 7.9%. And again, this is looking at our district-wide data.
So to clarify, you would theoretically want everybody to be red here?
No.
Okay, I'm not.
You want everybody in the green, but you want that,
Want-
you want it to decline. You want less chronic absenteeism. So the
Okay, you
greater
want it to
percent-
decrease.
Okay, that's what I'm not, okay. You want the percentage to decline, but the
Color
color
to-
bands is
is
still the
still-
same as the other color bands.
Yep,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you. When you were like, it's backwards, I'm like, no, I don't understand.
Definitely the product they're selling, they want more.
Yes.
Where they're coming to school.
Oh,
Perfect. And I kind of will go over, I don't have a slide for it, but kind of the proactive things that we've been doing as a district this year. So this really shows the breakdown of school site, current enrollment as of January 2024, and then the attendance rate. And then the totals at the bottom there.
And that attendance rate is like right now, take a temperature, how are you doing on attendance?
And that's going to be important because when Rosa gets into her budget slide, you're going to see an enrollment number that's different than this, because remember, that's on that day that it's collected, right? So the state collects that
A snapshot.
snapshot. This is filled in as of yesterday. So this is our enrollment as of yesterday and the percentages.
So the other piece I was going to say, and I don't have a slide, but I'll just kind of elaborate, is we were connecting with families really proactively at the beginning of this school year in partnership with the liaisons, right? We had schools reaching out to families. If we knew that they were on our list as chronically absent last year, right? Connecting with them before the school year started, connecting those first few weeks of school, making sure we had the supports in place to get them to school. The other piece that we've really concentrated as a district is through our attention to attendance, or our A2A program. We were doing conferences, right? So again, that family school site connection of like, we want you at school. We also sent out a proactive letter from our superintendent, kind of talking about the importance of school, things we can do to really set up for a positive attendance. We've also really fostered our relationship with the district attorney. So we've been holding mediations in a really timely manner where that team comes to our school sites. We're connecting and really talking through how to increase our attendance, right? So we're creating contracts with families. We're really getting into the barriers of why we're not coming to school and having those hard conversations. So that's really supported some of our families that have been chronically absent for many years, right? The other piece, and I'll just mention this, and I've said we're using our A2A, or our attention to attendance, and that's helping our school sites get those letter 1s, letter 2s out and monitoring our attendance rates. So we've been working, this is year 2 where we're really working with principals to really understand what those letters mean, how important those conferences are, right? To have meaningful conversations with families about our attendance. Yeah.
I have a question.
Questions? Okay.
Um, so what, so you're saying we use the, A2A?
Attention to attendance
So
program.
Is that kind of like a AI type of thing that we're using now?
No, it's like a data system. So it connects with our attendance, right, with our ARIES and reports out on absences. So when a student reaches a certain number of tardies and absences, it triggers a letter to be sent to families, which normally our school sites would be sending, but we're partnering with A2A and they're sending the letters for us. We've been doing this, I think we're on year 6 of using A2A.
I would have said 5,
But
yeah.
it won't trigger a letter unless the school site goes in and kind of captures the conference. So it's also a place where we're capturing the connections and contact attempts we're reaching out to families.
The reason why I bring this up is because I read an article. No, I don't know everything about it, but I was like, okay, this is pretty interesting. And right now we're just talking about attendance. I'm not sure if you guys are aware with MPUSD. I believe they're using, I want to say it's called Everyday Labs. And basically it's AI like this. And what they're doing, what I can remember from this article that I read is basically they're pulling that information. Let's say it's, students that they're missing on Mondays. They're
Right.
missing on like
Looking
something
at
that
those
would be right,
patterns and
looking at those
trends.
and it pulls that report.
Mhm.
And the reason why I bring it up is because who knows if something like that would also be, that. Oh, so this is what it does.
Yeah,
It pulls that.
and I
Okay.
can speak to MPUSD is using A2A. A lot of our sister districts are using it because it does help make sure we're hitting those timelines with letters. But yeah, you can pull up and look at those trends. And that's a big conversation, right? Is like, hey, we're noticing that your student is out on Mondays, right? And that's where you can get into the nitty gritty. Like I was in a mediation meeting with a family where come to find out that was the only time that I think it was OT. They were able to get an OT appointment. So every single week they're missing it that same morning. And I was able to reach out to the office and say, we need an afternoon appointment. Like, how can we make this work? And we were able to kind of work through that, right? Which is a good example of that partnership and how it's so important.
And with this system too, our district social worker who supports attendance, he pulls a report and he can see like this, who is chronically absent right now, right? So he can pull that A2A report. He then case manages all of those students. So he reaches out to families. He decides like some of them, again, thank you for the van. Like we'll go pick them up in the mornings if they're not getting to school. He'll kind of do those pieces, but he's able to pull, there's like 15 different reports that you can pull for different ways to get that. It also allows us to get this percentage on an ongoing basis. Instead of waiting till those certification periods to see where we are, we can see kind of check mark early on, like where are we in terms of attendance?
Another proactive piece we're utilizing in A2A is they're called positive postcards. And it's really if we see a student's attendance increase, they're sending a postcard to the student that says, hey, we've seen you. We're so glad you're coming to school. And I think I've shared samples, but that's been really beneficial too. I was actually at the Every Child Count Symposium a few weeks ago at the conference. I sat in on an attendance and it was a couple of schools sharing out, even just having teachers writing postcards and how that increased attendance, right? Like, we're so glad you're here. So, and one of the examples was they had done like a home visit and on the family's fridge, they had those postcards. Right. So we're proud of the postcards. So I was like, oh, this is it. So
Do
uh-huh.
we have next year's calendar already?
It has not been board approved yet, but it's
Okay. Just the reason that I ask is that we are also living in the thing where families are now taking vacations during the school year. And I feel like one way to combat that is to try to get the calendar out really early and be letting people know right now when we're going to be on vacation next year and really talking about like, hey, you taking a vacation during the school year, then we're struggling to pay for a music teacher, or that, you know, just trying to make it as transparent as possible. These are the
Totally.
times that
I,
it would be helpful for us for you to go on vacation and not during the school year.
I wholeheartedly agree with Sarah. Our issue has always been, decades on now, is we all try to follow the high school district.
We
I
try to
think
create
M-
alignment.
I
Mhm.
think MCOE needs to get involved and at some point say, you know what, since everyone else is relying on you, because the reason is whatever they do, if we don't match it, then we're gonna have a higher increase of absenteeism, because brothers and sisters go, you know, so it's paramount.
Well, and the impacts on teachers too, right? Our community is connected and
So
absolutely.
I would, I humbly asked our superintendent maybe to start having that conversation with the superintendent of MCOE and say, you know, as our LEA, you know, this is affecting all districts, you know, within your purview. And because of that, you know, I think you need to step up and make sure this issue is resolved, because this is an ongoing issue that's directly impacting our students' learning and the income levels because of attendance. So yeah, and by the way, we just did a survey at the high school. We're still working on
The calendar.
We haven't even proposed one yet. We're reviewing a couple, and we just did a survey vote among staff to see which one they prefer. And once that's chosen, then it gets approved by the board, by the union, then it goes before the board, and then, you know, we're talking a long-term process here. So I think, you know, we need to resolve this, you know, it's time.
In full agreement.
Year after year after
Well,
year.
my question to you, as someone who works in the high school district, I get your arduous process. Can they start doing maybe 3 years at a time? Because
I'm okay with it,
it's
but-
not really more difficult to do 3 years than it is to do it
I
to
think
do
the
1 year.
issue revolves around funding, and because every year we do school budgets based on yearly funding, and that directly affects staffing levels and cuts and stuff. So I think the way the state does it makes that difficult, but it should be done that. It should be done that way. Yes. I agree with you.
How
But,
does
you know,
this,
every year we're worried about the budget.
how does this compare to pre-COVID numbers? I think these were higher before, right? Like 97.
These were higher, but we are making our way back to what was pre-COVID.
Because then
which
it
is really
dropped
good
too,
news.
right? I think
It had dropped.
Huh?
Mhm.
So
we're like in the 80s, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So it
so
is slowly
we
coming
are
down.
improving.
Okay.
So having said that, you know, before coming to this meeting, I was gonna propose two ideas, you know, and looking at the presentation beforehand. One was directly tied to this. You know, this is our number one revenue generator besides grants and besides increasing enrollment levels. You know, this is it. Every percentage increase we can increase, that's a definite almost $500,000 on our bottom line, just with the 1% increase. And so I think anything we can do to increase those levels, you know, I love the software component of it. However, I would maybe consider asking the board to, and our staff, to look into other incentives, you know, for our students and families to encourage them to not go on those vacations, you know, have them attend, whether it be some type of financial reward, some type of stickers, education, gift cards, whatever it is, you know. You know, we have some wiggle room right now, and we have this learning loss. So, and this again ties to the learning loss. The more days they spend, they're having increase in and decreasing their learning loss over time, and that, you know, they can directly affect. So I'm open to that idea. I would like to see staff come back with more ideas on how to incentivize increasing that enrollment, attendance rates. You know, when I was going to school, we had incentives, we had gift certificates, we had monetary, we had school college bonds, you know, that we would give out $50, $100, whatever it is. Some tangible benefit that, you know, our community can look towards and say, hey, you know what, this might be the little extra that gets me to come to school.
Well, I had a question on that. I guess part of it also be on the data of what students are missing school. Because I
Yeah.
think if it's like the ones that are going on vacation, okay, that's certain percent.
Right.
But if it's part of it is like either with like homelessness or
Well, and also I
other
think,
stuff,
yeah,
yeah.
it's important to note, it's also illness. It's not an excuse. So I think, again, it's one of those flaws of the funding system that the idea of ADA is flawed in the sense that, you know, what often happens is that parents feel pressure for their kids to come to school, students come to school and they're not feeling well. That infects other students. Then you have a whole class that's out, right? Or we have a student who's not feeling well, which exacerbates behaviors, then that student has a behavior issue and then they're suspended, right? So I mean, it's one of those things that we should never be at 100% because there's always going to be the realities of things that happen and
Reasons to stay home.
right, reasons to stay home. And it's not as if like an excused absence counts differently than an unexcused absence in the sense of, you know, those percentages and who's here. So I think, like you said, it's really important to think about looking down, and that's what the district social worker does as well, is looks at why is a student absent? Because at 10 absences, even if they're excused, right? Even if they're excused, they're considered chronic. So if you were out and you had, you know, a medical procedure and you're out for 10 days and you're not on independent study, then you're chronic. But that's very different than somebody who went to, you know, Disneyland. And again, even then, I'm like, tell us that you're going to Disneyland so we can prepare for the fact that you're going to be gone, right? I mean, that's the thing. I'd rather you not go, but if you're going to go, let us know because then I can be prepared. But I think, yeah, it's important for us to look similarly to the dashboard, for us to look past just the number and look at what are those reasons, and then provide those for students who are making that progress because they're working to come to school for the right reasons there, but also not
Penalize.
not have punitive consequences for students who don't get that perfect attendance certificate because they happen to be sick for a week at a time. Yeah. Yeah.
Agree that 100%
Yeah.
is not the target.
Yeah.
I think, you know, maybe 96, 97% would be more realistic.
Yeah.
And I do believe that it shouldn't be negative. And if we do have an incentive program, I think there should be options for those students who didn't meet it because of sickness, verified. So I think we can address those concerns, you know?
Yeah.
But I would love to see an incentive program at this district, you know?
Yeah, there's a ton of low hanging fruit here. Those are still really low numbers. And just to give a specific recent example, in the fall, like, I think it was trying to remember what month, it was like November or something at my site. We had, the principals posted the attendance level for each grade level and, then like had a contest for that month about, oh, we're going to reward the grade level with, you know, the highest. And everybody bumped up 2 different percentage points by the end of the month. And suddenly the 95s were 97 and the 92s were 94 and because, oh, you know what? I'm really well enough to go to school today. And I don't think a genuinely sick child was dragging themselves in. I think it was that little extra piece. And, one district that I studied, one elementary school I studied is actually in San Antonio, Texas, which was what they refer to as a 90-90-90 school, meaning 90% low income, but still achieving at 90% of on the state tests in Texas. One of the things that they did is that they just involved the whole neighborhood and they put the attendance percentage on the marquee every day. Like today it was this, yes, it was that. And everybody in the neighborhood like went and checked every single day. It was a big deal, you know, while and little, you know, fireworks on the marquee when it was 98%, you know, or above, because they just normalized it as like, this is a goal that our community has. We're not penalizing you and we're not here, but this is a goal that people go to school in our neighborhood.
The benefit to those larger group kind of incentives is that you don't make that student or the parent who has a genuinely sick child feel like, oh, you know, or like when you focus on that, oh, you're going to get the perfect attendance certificate. I've seen kids drag themselves into my classroom where I'm like, why are you here? You know, as opposed to like when you do that more like, oh, which class, which grade level, those kinds of things, you're sort of diffusing the benefit and the across it. And so then it's more that community think, right? But engaging the community. So when you drive past it, why aren't you in school? There's that too, right? When you're in a small community that people's focus is on that. And so
So I guess in agreement with that as a board to look at those options.
Yeah.
And have the
Yeah.
staff bring that back various options. Okay. Thank you.
Sounds good. Uh-huh. So we're transitioning to the essential question Debrief.
And we'll pass out some additional handouts, as Rosa is going to segue into. Yeah, that's what we were saying. We just need to go forward one slide. And Rosa is going to take us, the board had wanted some more information about like how school site budgets are built and funded. Rosa's going to take a little bit of a look back to things that adjusted when she came in as our CBO and how she put sort of a formula in place. And then, of course, with one-time funds and those things accessible to the sites, as well as sort of taking a slightly deeper dive into current year and how, and mid-year, she does this with her team and the school sites where she says, okay, here's where your spending is right now. Do we need to do any changes, move into different areas so that you can get this done in a timely manner and different percentages? So I know I sent that to you in an email, but we've got it in a bigger scope. And so now's a good time to take a pause. If you've So I thought we were going to circle back at the end. No, want to do it? Okay.
Questions along the way, so there may not be.
They're not me. Okay. Yeah.
Is there anything in your notes that we have, that you've been taking along the presentation that we haven't discussed yet that you want us to talk about before we transition to budget?
The only one comment that I want to say right off the bat when we started is we obviously know there's a great need for students. They need additional support, like reading it right away off that. And it goes to everything. Math has all these reading problems for them to, surpass this and get, I mean, we need that. And it goes back to earlier, last year, I had a parent reach out. I can't remember if it was second grade or third grade, but her child was having issues and falling back, and she reached out because she was like, how do you guys not have something in plan? My kid, and I know that there's obstacles as a district that we could have or not have. So it just goes to show that we need it. We need to find something. I know there's state regulations. I know that we have to, but obviously we have to kind of do something where we have the support for the students because we need it. We need it in our district, all districts, I'm sure, but in our district, we really need to get that additional support for those students. After school, before school, CSUMB used to have a reading program. I remember that. Like, we need to find those options for all grade levels that we see that are targeted. It just needs to happen. That's the only comment that I want to do.
Cindy, I'm glad you brought that up. That I mentioned earlier, I had two proposals, and that was the second one. And that is, I think our district, looking at the data, knowing reading crosses over into various academic, minutia. I would like to see our district create a massive district-wide reading campaign, across districts, across levels. I'm talking significance, idea of time out every day where they take out an AR book, read. The goal is maximum number of books read, assessed at some type of AR level to prove that there is comprehension. Grade school-wide, everyone reading first 10 minutes, whatever it is of every period or, every hour or whatever it takes, and then provide incentives to encourage students. We used to have, you read so many books, you get this, you read so many books, you get that, you have a major, gathering, with the school, to acknowledge great readers and the points and this and that, and, work with the local businesses, pizza, this, that, whatever. But, this idea that, it's a comprehensive district-wide, grade by grade, program, incentive program to encourage reading, and it's, it has to be district-wide, grade by, when you do it that way and every single grade level knows it's coming, whether it's kindergarten all the way through eighth, I have mandatory reading in my class every day. They come in, first 10 minutes, take out your book. Let's read. All right, let's take a log. All right, let's take the AR assessment. And then I send them to the library to get another book over and over and over. And then we provide incentives. Oh, you get to go to this party, or you get to this certificate, whatever it may be. But it has dramatically increased reading levels, and what we do as a district as a whole lets each individual students understand how important it is, so anyway, I was hoping to ask the staff to come back with various ideas on how to pursue this endeavor with the support of the board. If the board doesn't support it, then I would understand, but I would like a uniform, unanimity in terms of, this approach. Reading by far is our number one targeted academic that affects all others.
And I think, Mr. Patel, what's really important about what you're saying too is that just to share that our district has had the highest percentage of participation in the county office's training in the science of reading. So we sent the most teachers because we know that, again, that the foundation is in that classroom instruction, right? Like what's happening before any of those, the classroom instructions, what's most important. And so the science of reading is really based on that K-2 foundations of reading so that, again, to get our students to the point where they can participate in they have to have those foundational reading skills to pick up the book and be able to do it. And so I met with Rosa at the County Office of Ed just last week or the week before. And she was just touching base to kind of say, like, what does it look like for next year? Because so many of our teachers have had that opportunity to be trained in the science of reading. Even outside of that K-2 span, we had a couple of special education teachers in the upper grades who are still teaching reading foundations.
Well, that's
we're
a good
trained as well.
segue into Monday is our next curriculum council meeting. And before the break, we did some surveys of all of our staff members because what curriculum council wants to do is to be able to come up with a united recommendation for the board to adopt for supplemental reading instruction so that we have some consistency. Knowing that primary grades may be doing one particular component, upper elementary, middle school. And so we're revisiting that this coming Monday. And so I think that'd be a great way for us to lead into our board agenda item for what we want to propose as we do for reading and be able to present those options to the board within the next 2 board meetings. We should have that pretty firm.
Kind of to build off of that, Alba, I let Melissa know I can't go to curriculum council on Monday, so I hope so yeah, if you can, I have Monterey County School Board Association meeting that evening, and I just realized I couldn't transition from one to the other and theoretically speak in complete sentences. But something that I have not seen in the elementary school presentations recently, they may still be doing it, but they're not talking about it to us. When I started on the board, the kids used to come in and they used to talk about like charms that they got for doing AR reading or passing basic math skills or that kind of thing, and that it was part of the elementary school culture. And part of that, because it goes back to math, was passing basic assessments in math, memorizing the addition facts at the lower elementary, memorizing their multiplication facts at the upper elementary, and that there were all these different targets for all these different grade levels. I haven't seen that in the presentations lately, and it would be something that I would be in favor of, bringing back and normalizing to parents in terms of just being really public. Hey, these are our 3rd grade goals, and these are your little charm necklaces that the kids get for, or whatever incentive program they choose to do. So things I'd be interested in, like, what's going on with the reading incentives and talking about reading in general, what's going on with basic math assessments and normalizing that across the elementaries. In regard to science of reading, I'd be interested in the district really looking at daily 5 instruction, which to me was by far and away the most effective training that I ever had in regards to teaching reading, and something that I use every day. And it's applicable certainly all the way up through elementary, and there are middle school teachers that use it too. It is something that usually sometimes the closest training is Los Angeles. So it would be, paying people to have to go to that training. I would absolutely think that it was worth it. You then can also train trainers. And then there's also later a nonprofit that I want to talk about involved in reading that I think potentially could be helpful. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to this, I feel like we need to really look, especially with the new LCAP, at what we're doing with intervention, and especially what we're doing with intervention related to hiring, in terms of if we can't get consistent paraprofessionals providing the kind of training, the kind of intervention that we're looking for, how can we do that in another way? Do we need to have designated intervention teachers at the elementary level that are providing that? Do we need to have certificated people that we're paying hourly? I can imagine a lot of retired teachers potentially being interested in that. It's like, if what we're doing is working like clockwork, great, and those people are there and things are consistently happening with the kids, and we're training and we're tracking what's happening with the children. But I just have not felt since COVID that, because of all these circumstances beyond our control, that that's happening. And so then I feel like, okay, if the model that we have is not working, then we need to change the model that we have.
The other piece I just wanted to add quickly, because I know we're going to keep moving, but we also, and I shared this in Curriculum Council, have been pulling together a SPED leadership team that's really been looking and reviewing various kind of tier 3 literacy and math curriculums, as well as curriculum in our mod severe classrooms. So making that connection between our tier 2 programs and those. We are also looking at what our sister districts as well as the high school district is pulling in, right, to create that alignment. So we've looked at about 6 different programs, and I'll be sharing out in Curriculum Council on Monday too. So absolutely.
I've just got 4 things that I had on my essential questions, and I'll just name them really quick, but I'm not going to go into them because I know that we're limited on time. So what I did notice was Santa Rita really needs a lot of help. So we need to really focus on that. I mean, everybody else to all the schools and stuff, but Santa Rita, I'm really, really super concerned with that school. As far as I feel like the academic language in math could be improved. That academic language needs to right away. I mean, that probably would be my first thing to do at the beginning of my math period, is go over academic language. The ELD curriculum, I'm hoping that works out really good. And did we ever have GLAD training here in Santa Rita?
Yeah, pre-COVID.
Oh, okay. So the teachers are aware of the GLAD training, or they've had the training.
We did that pre-COVID. We haven't brought it back post-COVID. Yeah.
I think it would be a good idea to bring that back. I know that when I taught, when I was teaching, that GLAD program was just fantastic. I don't know, aside with the daily 5 that you mentioned, I don't know. I just don't want to throw too much at the teachers, but I do, because I know how it is to be pressured into doing so many things in one day. And, but anyways, that's my take on that, and we can move on.
I'll say 1 second to that. I just want to say, Elba, on your, when you were talking about Santa Rita, I think it's a great point to close, because again, like Melissa talked about in the beginning, the important piece about that is, because of the requirements under the new LCAP, the community, our stakeholders are going to see a change where more is allocated there because it's required.
Mhm.
So you saw all those areas in the red. So remember, an area that we're in the red as a district, we need to have actions for. And areas that each of our school sites are in the red, we have to have specific actions for that school site. So you're going to see more services and more resource allocation to Santa Rita because of that. And so I think that's a really important piece to keep in mind as we go into the new LCAP formation.
And just so that people are aware of the history, when we first started the intervention program and we were allocating paras to intervention at the elementary, Santa Rita got twice as many as everybody else because we did a head count in terms of how many kids were in the red, and that was how we allocated the resources. So it wasn't like Santa Rita's getting more because they're Santa Rita. It
exactly.
was like
Right.
there were so it's not different from what we've done before. It's using a different metric to basically come up with the same thing that needs to be done.
I love what you said, academic language.
Yeah.
You know, that has been a focus in, regardless of whether you're an English teacher or not, the idea that every teacher is a reading teacher. You know, that every teacher, like you said, whether it's math, science, their focus is always, on the academic language. Have that up front, have it as a vocabulary, make sure they understand the words, and especially for our EL learners in that classroom, that helps as a bridge. So I think developing academic language and making that a focus as part of the instruction,
Mhm.
rather than, oh, we're just going to read it along the way, is a big deal.
Sure is. Right, we're gonna go ahead and move to school site budgets. This is the last part of the presentation. I think it's the fun part of the presentation. So, just been waiting.
Show me the money.
So I know we talk about attendance and how important it is. I wanted to bring this kind of like a snapshot of what our rate per student is this year. Every year it changes depending on the COLA. So every year that we get a new percentage COLA, that's where they increase the base funding, as you can see on the first line. I did a rate per day just to give you an idea that if one regular student is out, and as you can see, there's different rate per grades, this is how much funding the school district is losing. So for example, a third grader missing one day of school can be anything from $55 to $83, depending if the student is a regular student or if it falls into EL, low income, foster, or homeless. So depending, that's a different rate. So just to give you an idea for the parents or anyone who's watching at home, they can see how we get funded every year.
I used to straight up give this to my parents on back to school night, and this is pre-COVID, pre-LCFF, when at that point it was about $40 per student per day. And I was just thinking, I was like, if your kid is not here, that was like $40 that we didn't get up to, now being like kind of 80. And that was actually helpful to people in terms of understanding, oh, wait, they were absent even 10 times this year. Wait, that was $400 that you didn't get, or $800 you didn't get.
Yeah.
What? You do all this? It is,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the amount of money that they give us, they're like, oh, you get all this, money. Really? You give us less than childcare. And you expect that preschool teacher, you don't make those demands on them. And yet when they come to elementary school, middle schools, you want the world. And wait a second, the funding's not there. So, this is a great number to have out there, Sarah. So I agree with you.
Yeah. So when Sarah was talking about how to put on that board, like what percentage of attendance, I would like to put how much money the district lost on that day. Hey, today we lost $10,000, $20,000. And it's just about communication. I know every year when we collect those low income forms, we send out a letter that says this is how much it's worth one form if you qualify but you didn't fill that out. So for parents to realize like, hey, it's important. It's not just a survey or something that I don't have time with. It's money that the district is actually losing. This is really, really important. Yes, we want the students to come to school, to be here, because not only they're losing their learning, we're also losing the dollars. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is just pretty much historical about how we fund our school sites. And just to make a point, this is
this does not include benefits and salaries and positions that every school site has. This is the school site discretionary funding. So at the beginning of the year, depending on the funding that we get, of course, we go through the budget. The same spreadsheet that you have with you on the different years is the same spreadsheet that I pass to the principals. That information is obviously linked with our financial system, and it's allocated in SCAPE, that's the financial system that we use. And every year, the district, the principals, I'm sorry, they decide where their funding along with the school site council, where that funding is gonna be allocated on. So for example, if Santa Rita gets funding in Title I, they can decide, okay, I'm gonna hire more paras to help out with those students that are lower, or I'm gonna do more extra hours for this teacher to help out those students that are behind. And as you can see in the years pre-COVID, the funding was different. Then the funding increased because we start getting those one-time funding. So as we are getting that funding from the district, we're also sharing that with our school sites because we know there is a need. So we spend at the district level, but we're also providing a school site allocation to each site. And right now this year, as you can see, our total funding is about $1 million all together for all the 6 school sites. You have a spreadsheet there. I always get together with the principals and the secretaries. We just had a meeting, I think it was, yeah, this last week. And I did provide the same spreadsheet that you have here. And I say, this is your percentage. We're half of the school year. We're supposed to be at 50% of expenditures in the perfect scenario. And I really highlight and talk about if you are below that, please take a look at your budget, work with your principal. If you need to do budget revisions, we're here to help you. We're trying to do as much as those meetings to be more in collaboration. Santa Rita, what are you doing to help out your students versus La Jolla or McKinnon, where everyone is sharing ideas and everyone is sharing resources. And that's the main reason why we get together. We actually have a group chat with all of our secretaries and all my business team, because if they have a question on, hey, I don't know what to spend this on, or I was thinking I can buy this, but I'm not sure, they can throw it in the chat box. And if I'm not available, one of my 6 members team in the business office will be available to answer that question. So we always try to provide that help and those resources for everyone so that pretty much no one can say, I didn't know what to do with this funding. Something happened and nobody got back at me. We're always there to support and answer any questions. And like I said, we meet with the principals. I'm also available one-to-one. So at the beginning of the school year, especially for those new principals, I always offer, I'm available. We can have a one-on-one meeting, and most of the time they do come. We have 1 hour, 2 hours, just going through the budget, explaining what they can buy, what's allowable, how they can do the budget revisions, the whole process. Any question that they have, I'm always here to help because we want those dollars to be spent, right? Because next year that 5th grader is not going to be in elementary. They're going to be probably in the middle school, where they're going to move to another, who knows, right? So we want to provide the services now this year, not hold it and save the fundings because of something. These are grant dollars. These are money that it's to be spent every year on our students. We're not a private business where we want to hold and save as much as we can. We don't. We want to provide the services the time that we get those funds.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa, for doing that, because this was something that I kind of requested a bit forward. And I appreciate that you take the time for school sites to know, like, you can ask me, because I
Oh, yeah,
think sometimes
definitely.
people say, like, well, I don't know if we can use it or if that falls within that category. So the fact that now there's a chat room in case somebody has a question of, like, I thought about this, but I'm not sure if we can use it
Mhm.
for that. And part of it is because I would visit sites sometimes and they would be doing fundraisers for certain things. So I started thinking, like, are we not giving the sites enough money? And then when I see this, I'm like, wait, they're having money left over every year? Like, they have all these projects that they've been discussing that they wish they could do. And I started thinking, wait, they did have enough funding. I don't know if it was just because they didn't understand what they could spend it on. I know there is restrictions on certain amount of things.
Yes. Mhm.
Huh?
Oh, the incentives.
Incentives is a tricky one. Like incentives is not usually something that we can use monies on in
Yes.
that same way. So that's why like with PBIS incentives, a lot of that is,
Yeah, there's ways. So to be able to provide incentives, we have to be very strategic. The only funding that we can use is LCFF, the unrestricted. Everything else, like we cannot do it because we get into these federal audits. There's ways that we can still do it. And yes, like you said, there is support that has been unspent every year. As you can see, usually they spend about the 80%. So this year I have the goal that I'm gonna be chasing them. And along with my budget technician, we've been sending emails, all starting the when they came back in January, we started sending the email saying, this is your percentage. Meet with your principal, CCing the principal as well for some of those allocations that we want them to spend the funding, especially with our title funds.
Yeah, and the other part of the conversation too is there's some fundraisers that I think that are awesome, really engagement, like La Jolla does their walkathon. Super community engagement, you know, whatever the case is, gets the kids walking, which is even awesome, the parents involved. And there's other where I felt like at times capacity is spent, like go eat at Chipotle or whatever that case is, right? So that's staff time that takes time to do those. And I'll ask my nephews, like, hey, how much money do you guys raise that? Oh, like $300-400. And I'm thinking like, man, that was a lot of staff time and capacity time when we're trying to figure out different ways to different engagement. Like, hey, we want to create a reading program, or we want to let parents know about this other support service that we have. So I started thinking, wait, staff is spending this much time and energy fundraising $300 or $400. It might be a larger conversation for the future of like, let's not even do those fundraisers, because it's so much time and energy that's spent on $300 or $400 as opposed to if it spends 10,000 or 15,000, or if it's a community engagement one like the walkathon, that kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, and most of those fundraisers go through the ASV and their activities and what they voted on and what they want to do. So it's different.
So
Student driven, yeah.
a lot of those ones, there's nothing on the staff. That's why they do them.
Yeah.
So the company does everything because they're getting most of the revenue. So the Chipotle one, they provide you the handouts, they send the media posts, they do all that. It doesn't fall on the school. So then they pick that one. But the challenge is we're getting a very small percentage. So what it really does in a lot of ways is it boosts Chipotle sales. They do give a percentage to us, right? So they take on the work. That's why they're more likely to choose those. The restaurant will take on the work piece of it, but the yield is very small,
Sure.
right? And there's no engagement within it.
So the other aspect too is like if ASB is able to request funds from the school for a project they're doing. So for example, if ASB is working like, hey, we need a fundraise for this project. It's like if there's already funding within the school budget to do what is they're trying to do. Like what are some activities ASB is trying to do, for example, that they are the reason why they do these food ones?
So a lot of times what they're doing for the fundraisers that go back into ASB is to like have snacks at their next dance, or make popcorn for their movie night, things like that, that don't really fall under things that Rosa would be like, yes, spend those taxpayer dollars on that. Because the audit is going to say, that's a gift of public funds. And so they're fundraising for some of those things, for like, oh, let's have, a movie night and we'll do popcorn and juice and those things, and kids won't have to pay for that, and it'll just be, just a fun incentive kind of thing.
So maybe another, I guess, workshop for even for myself is what is classified under, for example, unrestricted funds or that kind of stuff, right? Because I guess part of what also my question would be is like some of the stuff we talk about is student engagement or community engagement, right? So for me, like a lot of those stuff that's kind of classified falls into that, right? So and that could be just me learning a little bit more what that terminology is and stuff, because I think that's kind of where I'm trying to understand, okay, how is that different from the other activities that we try to do often?
And usually, and again, Rosa's the expert, but
Sure.
Where mine comes in, again, I'm going to go back to migrant, the most restrictive program there is. We can't provide anything that would be perceived as a gift of public fund or an incentive, right? So when we're talking about like buying the little rings, the charms, we're talking about lanyards, t-shirts, those kinds of things.
Decoration for like
Gift
graduation.
cards, those are gifts of public fund. We cannot use federal funding for that capacity. If it was pencils that students are going to use for academics, notebooks, playground equipment, something like that, there's some parameters there. So a lot of it is that when you fundraise the funds, it gives you a lot more flexibility in how you can utilize it. You're not under the same restrictions that we are. So federal funds are tightly restricted, right? For good reason.
Of course, yeah.
And so when you fundraise them and you have that, it opens up the parameters of what you can utilize those funds for much more openly. So I can have a walkathon and say, I'm going to use this funds to, the money we raise is going to be used to purchase gift cards to incentivize AI, or accelerate AR, right? We can do that. We can put that out there, but you couldn't do that with the restricted funding that's there.
So for example, I know when we talked about like the attendance incentives, right? As far as gift cards, that kind of stuff. So would that require separate fundraising then on our part?
No, so yeah, as long as it's not like gift cards or giving out cash or anything that it's kind of like Summer said, it represents kind of like a gift of
Sure.
public funds. We do get audited by our auditor and or county office. So every time we have something like that, it has to be out of our LCFF funding. And we have to have approval. There is a process to get it approved. So we get audited by the county, we get audited by our
Not as far as the
county
process, but I'm saying
office.
as far as the type of funds that are spent. So when we talked about incentives, what were you trying to think of as far as incentives for attendance?
Once again, I was open, to.
Yeah,
get,
I mean-
whether it be
Some of the ideas,
awards,
yeah,
whether it be
yeah.
certification, whether it be some type of bond for
What would-
college.
If we
what
can
would be allowed then as far
Connect
as-
it to student learning. So
Okay.
pencils,
Yeah.
school supplies.
An easy answer, I can tell, okay, if they come 100 days, I'll give you a book and I can use but I don't know if they want books.
Sure.
So we just have to be strategic and making sure that whatever we give them, it links to academic.
Okay. So for
um,
example, if you have like a.
There's that connection, yeah. As long as we can explain it, it's
So
possible.
like a pizza party for certain students that did something, those funds wouldn't be allowed with any type of school funding unless it's fundraised.
No, unless they're doing, there's ways that you can do it.
Academic achievement.
For example, if you're providing food, as long as there's a meeting or there's an activity going on, not just giving out food, because it would be like a
You-
gift of public
Yeah, you
funds.
can't just give them extra food as a reward, right?
Mhm.
But if we're going to have a student
Field trip or
attendance
something.
meeting where we're going to talk about great job, how come everybody got here? What made you come to school? You all had 100% attendance.
Then you-
Let's talk about it. We're going to do a student listening circle around it. We could provide
The
something
people.
related to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is allowed, it's just the way it's used. That's where you said you kind of have to get a little bit
Mhm.
creative to make sure.
Yeah, it has to be linked back to academics.
Sure,
Yeah.
okay. So it's not so much the item itself, it's just the way it's being given out and the reason for it.
Well,
Both. Yeah,
it
yeah.
depends, right? For example, some of the expenditures on ASB, I can tell you they buy balloons because they want to do the dance for graduation, and they pay for the DJ for the graduation and decoration and all of that. So that would be hard to say that is linked back to academics, right? So that's why they use the ASB. So there are some activities and things like that that we would not be able to link back to
It can, and
academic.
I'll just give you another migrant example. We had an audit finding and had to pay back money many, many years ago because for t-shirts. So t-shirts is a big
T-shirts,
one,
yeah.
and backpacks. So we bought t-shirts that students wore, like if we went on a field trip in our summer programs and stuff. So initially we had a finding. They said that's a gift to public fund. You cannot buy that. So what we had to do is in our following plan, we had to write a piece of our plan that was around identification of students under safety. And we said, in order for us to identify our students in group situations for them to be safe, we're going to buy these shirts, and that tells everybody that's who these students are. But we had to write a plan, have it approved by the state as part of our plan in order to apply, to do the t-shirts. Same things with backpack. All migrant students used to get a backpack. That was one of the things that Migrant Ed gave out. They said, nope, there's no connection. You can't just give backpacks or promotional items, right? You can't just promote your
Right.
program. I don't,
So-
you can't promote your program. So anything with an emblem, you couldn't do anything like that. But then we started saying, hey, we're delivering school supplies to students in these backpacks. It's the tool that's holding the supplies that we can give them. Then we could give them a backpack, but it had to be part of our plan, written in there, approved by the state with a purpose and intent. So it's
perfect sample. Summary.
Just a couple of comments really quick. Rosa, so based on your understanding, we're gonna be reverting back to those pre-COVID numbers at some point within the next 2-3 years. Is that correct?
There is still a lot of information that we don't know.
But is that the expectation?
Yes, of course, because we're not gonna have, most of the one-time funds expired last year, they're expiring this year. So eventually, our funding, like I mentioned last time, we're looking into a budget reduction next year.
So, so that's one issue. The other issue is, you know, I was on help interview principals, at the district level many times, and this issue always comes up. And that is, do we properly train site principals on how to do school budgets? You know, and what I found out is there wasn't any formal training. You know, it was up to the current principal to teach their vice principal. So if they did get promoted, and that never happened, there was no systematic process, you know. So I'm hoping we have a system where we are effectively teaching each and every principal how to manage and properly allocate funds. So that's one issue. The other issue is this idea of red line. Most principals that I've talked to, they always fear running out of funds before the end of the year. So they always protect the budget as much as possible. And then what ends up happening is then they run so close to the end. Oh, now I have excess money. I got to spend it really quickly. So exactly. So a solution was that I've talked to some principals, and that is, you know, certain districts have adopted a floating red line, you know, 4 or 5%, where use the money, and under certain circumstances by the year end, if they went over budget, as long as it was cleared and approved, they had a wiggle room of 5 to 10%. And that helped address the issue of fear of not having enough funding. Now that obviously creates a situation with the board and funding, because now you have a 10% variation that might be out there. However, it did create 100% or close to 100% usage of the funds. You know, in this case, we have over, you know, 100,000 on, you know, left on the plate, you know, 20,000 per site roughly, you know, and in previous years, it was about 10,000 or 8,000. But obviously we're not going to get to zero. But I think if we do the proper training and we provide that little bit of cushion variance, you know, that is agreed upon by the board, you know, I think those will help address this issue. And I want to thank you, Jacob, for bringing this up, because I saw it at a high school level too. So this isn't just unique to our district, you know, but those are the two solutions I've seen. And that is proper training early on in the process. And the second is providing that little bit of wiggle room, you know, the redlining, if you will, of 5 to 10% variance, you know, that the board approves. And then once again, constant, like you said, you meet with principals, it should be more frequent, projections, allocation. And as far as funding, these funds, it's up to the discretion of the site, especially the principal. I'm gonna use this much for after school. I'm gonna use this for education. I'm gonna use this for materials. I'm gonna pay these teachers extra to stay after school. You know, there's a lot of discretion within the principals, but they need the guidance, you know, and the expertise of the district. So
The other question real quick. So when you're mentioning as far as the principals, is school site council the only place where they have to get teacher input or parent input for the budget?
Only required place.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because not recently, but in the past, I've been to school site council meetings, and it's more just kind of a quick rubber stamp by the principal as opposed to too much like engagement. So a lot of times I wonder if a lot of us teachers or staff might know, like, hey, we should be spending the money for these items, because they see it. Because as a principal, it's a tough job. I mean, I see Mr. Morales on the street and, you know, walking here, walking there, and I'm like, man, anything else has to manage this budget and make sure am I spending money here? And I'm thinking, a lot of times it could be a lot of feedback that's needed, you know, from his teachers or whatever the
Yeah.
case might be.
And I think they're also doing that during their leadership team meetings. That's a
Sure.
big part of their leadership team meetings with their site leads. And that's where they're telling them, this is what we need. This is where that's coming from. I wrote a note so I wouldn't forget. I think the other important piece to think about when you're talking about why they fundraise and principals is, again, there's a requirement within school budgeting that what we purchase is fair and reasonable, right? So it doesn't mean that you can buy the best thing or the kind of pin that you really like. You have to purchase what's fair and reasonable within that. And so sometimes site leaders they'll be fundraising because we really all want gel pen. Just an example, right? We all really want gel pens, or we want Kleenex with lotion, right? Whatever that is. And that by the state could be deemed not necessarily fair and reasonable because it could be $6 of difference. So if you're buying this box of Kleenex, it's 99 cents. And if you're buying this box of Kleenex, it's $6. And unless you can justify why this is fair and reasonable, you can have a finding. And so a lot of times, again, it's about that flexibility in the use of the funds. If I've raised the money, then I can buy the $6 Kleenex because nobody's on. It doesn't matter if it's fair and reasonable. We've already determined it. And so for me in purchasing, that was always one that I really had to talk to my team about. Like, I would love to buy the Sharpie brand, but it's $12 and this is 99 cents. So we have to buy this brand because that's fair and reasonable. And so sometimes I think that's also what's there.
Yes.
And in support of fundraisers, sometimes it also provides a really good opportunity for leadership for the kids. Like, I'm going to be overseeing this squishy sale for Valentine's Day fundraiser that's coming up. And I will tell you that my 5th and 6th grade leadership team is chomping at the bit to be in charge of the squishy sale. Like, they've been looking forward to it for months. So like,
That's a good
the
point.
Squishmallows. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like they absolutely like waiting with bated breath. So, it may not seem to us like the world's most exciting thing, but I have a group of 11 and 12-year-olds who think that it's so
I humbly apologize to our entire board. I just want to keep us on track. We're already at the
Yeah.
12
So,
o'clock hour.
I go
I
ahead
don't
and
want to
move
cut
to
anyone
the
off, but fellow
next
board
slide.
members, is there any other concern that you feel significant that you want to continue with, or can we move forward?
No, I think
can
we
move forward.
addressed it enough.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Thank you. So just a little overview on how each school site gets their funds allocated. So pretty much on the LCFF funding, they are getting an allocation based on the student enrollment. So we do have a rate, and the school sites that have more students enroll, of course, they get more funding. The LCAP, we use the enrollment based on the duplicated count. So depending on how many of those students they have that qualify for foster youth, EL, low income, that's how much funding they get. So if you see on the spreadsheet, for example, Santa Rita gets the most funding because they have the higher unduplicated and the higher EL. So that's why they get the most funding on Title I, LCAP, and EL grant. The same with the Title IV, the lottery funding, we also use enrollment. We get a rate on student. It doesn't really, we don't get funded on duplicated, or it's just enrollment. And then we also provide special ed funding per classroom per teacher as well, depending on how many teachers per site. Then we have the one-time funds, which, as you can see on the different years, have been changing because those one-times are usually for 1 year. I'm just highlighting here, this is how much we provided on the one-time funding for all the school sites, which has been probably one of the years that they have been getting the most funding at the school site level. And there is a description there for each of them. These are more restricted because they're one-time, they're a federal grant, so they don't have a lot of flexibility, but we do give them to them and tell them, okay, this is for your PE, this is for arts, this is for library books, and this is for your middle school science classroom. So even though it is restricted, we still pass it on to them so they can best make the best decision based on their school site needs. Okay, and this is just a snapshot of enrollment. The enrollment that we've been using is the 1920, which is pre-COVID. This is the enrollment that got certified as of December 14. As you can see, there's a difference. The reason why I'm still using the 1920 enrollment is because we haven't done any budget cuts at the school site level. At the contrary, we've been providing more as we get more of those one-time funds. However, this next year, as you know, it's going to be a little bit different. So I'm waiting to hear more on the May revised information and see how next year is going to look. And depending on that, we're going to provide new allocations that are going to be based on the most recent enrollment. And the only reason why we were using that, it's not to do the budget cuts as well. And because we were also getting that waiver, remember, we're getting funded on the 3-year average. So we're not going to have that no more. So that might change next year.
And I know there was an enrollment number we used earlier. So what's the final enrollment number that's uses it? We'll find that out in June. Is that?
For this year, for
Yeah, for this
23,
year,
24?
23.
So the way that the state works, we have the December 15 timeline. That's the first certification. And then at the end of January, we get to do the last one if there was any changes or any revisions. So if there are not revisions or anything that we need to change, that's gonna be the enrollment we are gonna get funded on.
So the one that you showed us earlier,
Mhm. Yeah. Let's say if we don't have any revisions, we won't get funded on that enrollment. We're gonna get funded on this
okay.
because that's the timeline.
Okay, so at the end of January, we'll know.
We'll know exactly. And as of now, I talked to our data specialist. There hasn't been any big revisions that we need to make, so that number looks pretty close to what we will get funded on. And this, just to give you an idea of what's the rate per student on each of the ongoing allocations that we have, that's pretty much our rate per student for each of the sites based on the 1920 enrollment. And I know for the Title III it's lower. However, the funding, it is lower, the funding that we get, and we are already paying positions to serve at the school sites. So it's not the whole grant that we give them. LCAP is huge, but out of the Title I, we already have positions serving Santa Rita, serving La Jolla. And what's left from those positions, that's what we use to provide to the school sites.
Mhm.
All right.
So really again, so that enrollment number you showed us earlier, that's for current enrollment, but the one we get funded is one from December.
The one that gets certified, yeah, and enrollment is gonna change every month. Like Summer mentioned, we have students that come and go, especially right now that
Yeah.
during the winter,
season.
some students.
For us that have a fairly high migrant population, that December date it's a terrible snapshot period. I mean, all of our neighboring districts have that same reality because our students leave that's third week of November and they return mid-January. So it also doesn't usually allow for the need for revision.
Okay.
It would be great if the state
Mhm.
changed that certification.
We've,
date.
yeah, we petitioned that for many, many years in my, yeah, so it used to be in October.
There's one certification for October, and then there's the one for December, which is what we get.
Yeah, there was
That's
lots
just
of
the initial.
advocacy on behalf of migrant at the state level. But
Okay, so really it has to do with the way the state requires when that number is turned in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's a,
Districts for the transitory,
it makes it challenging. I mean, you have to think about it as they have to have some period of time where they take a snapshot to start working on their budget, right? So they're basically like, here's our snapshot so we can start figuring out what's going to happen. If they waited till the end of the year, there was no way that they could issue a budget by July 1, like a pure pupil amount. So they have to pick a point in which it's feasible for them to be able to formulate a budget. So they have to pick, yeah.
And
So-
just to make a point, we do get funded on ADA. So even though we have more students coming in, they're gonna generate ADA if they come to school, of
Sure.
course.
So that's a December 15th, but you said that if there's revisions, but the revisions only can take place up to December. So like, let's say, you mentioned at the end of January, if there's any revisions, they'll let you do
January
it, but
31st.
it's only for the.
For
the
any
day that-
errors that happen, yeah.
Yeah, not
So
so much
usually, yeah.
being whatever the case is. Yeah.
There's a
Technically that's what I'm just trying to get at, because so it's really not an extended period because. they're
No.
not asking-
one
they're not allowed
designated
to-
day,
Yeah.
one designated day that
It's,
And what's the
That's
date
what-
that the state requires it? You said?
it's December 15. It might change a little bit if there's a holiday, but
Yeah,
usually,
roughly around that time, yeah. And that's the one that the state puts in, obviously, potentially, because of the budget. I'm just saying, because, yeah.
So.
You should agendize that as an issue for LULAC to take up with the state.
I mean, that's kind of where I'm
Uh,
thinking, so. Like
I second that.
yeah.
Can we have a vote?
So as I became state director, slowly I'm gonna start meeting more with state legislators. And so these are type of conversations I like to slowly get into place, because lots of times what happens, right? You have a program and you say the system works for the last 15 years. And tell somebody they don't know, or they just keep going at it, and somebody says, hey, you know what? You talk to these school
Yeah.
districts in your area, this is what's happening. And then they make kind of the same thing they were about the community day schools, right? Or the block. schools.
Yeah, though. And again, in our advocacy at the state level, it's really, I mean, the response we got back a little bit is like, so tell us how we have enough time. Like, what is that date where we take that shot and it gives the state enough time to know, right? So I think that December 15th is the mid-year, basically meaning they then have, till July 1 to kind of create and finalize a budget, but
And then it'd be interesting to know how many schools are like in our California are like our school where it's impacted that much. Cause like, you guys are impacting 40% of districts, or I'm not sure,
Yeah.
whatever the number.
yeah,
is.
and we're in the migrant world. I mean, we're the one of the, but we fluctuate between us and Fresno as the biggest regions have for the last several years. We just recently went down to number 2, but Fresno's number 1. So it's been, that point. Now, the only other problem that we face is that the migrant population has dramatically decreased, right? Families aren't making those qualifying moves anymore. And so that was the other part of the state that made the argument challenging, is because our students aren't making the same level of move as they were before.
So, just to conclude a little bit, we reviewed the SBAC data. We looked at our internal data. Thank you for the staff for presenting the data for us. I think after looking at it, we all looked at it and, we didn't have tremendous drops. We have more or less stagnant, I think, in most categories, The concern is obviously our other groups, sub-level groups, EL, socioeconomic, et cetera. Having said that, I appreciate that the outcome of this is we're looking into a few programs. One is increasing some type of attendance program, incentives. We're also looking into reading initiatives across district-wide. At this meeting, we also approved a new position to further develop our support programs, after school, post additional learning access. At the same time, we also are looking at Alta Ed and working with MCOE to provide other opportunities for our students to redeem themselves in terms of their education and behavioral issues. Having said that, I think it was a very productive meeting. Is there any final comments any board members would like to make before I ask for a vote to conclude?
I think we've said it all.
I really want to thank,
Thank everybody.
yeah, I really want to thank my fellow board members. I feel very fortunate that we have a wide, diverse view. We have teachers here, we have parents, and we have stakeholder groups, and we have expert admin staff, So I'm glad we're working during this, difficult time in the educational process, most educators agree, we've been here for decades, and this is probably the toughest we've ever seen it, hands down. And so I'm glad we have a good team trying to address it. And I know at the last board meeting, I went off a little bit, but the truth is, we're trying. And I get upset sometimes when people don't acknowledge how difficult it is and how people are trying everything possible to try to address it. So, I understand we have issues. I understand we have concerns. We have suggestions, but, we also got to remember that people are trying, and never forget that. So thank you for everyone. I would entertain a motion to close the meeting.
I motion.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Lopez,
Aye.
Ms. Turner,
Aye.
Ms. Ariano,
Aye.
Mr. Sandoval,
Aye.
Mr. Patel.
Aye, Captain.
Motion passes 5-0.